Hello, everybody, and welcome to the return of Chaos Under Heaven. That is episode 24. We've taken a bit of a hiatus, but we are finally back. This is a show where we talk about politics, economics, theory, history, philosophy, and a variety of other subjects from a communist perspective. I am your host, fellow traveler, as you are all familiar and quite aware, and today we are joined by Victor Magarino, a Spanish Marxist who attended university and is going back in September for his master's degree in both economics and philosophy. And we've got a number of questions for him today. I'm going to play devil's advocate. And with that being said, let us go ahead and get started. Okay, so Victor, how you doing, man? Tell me about your day.
Well, I'm doing fantastically well. I just ate dinner, about an hour ago, and I'm doing, energetic. Let's see if we can get a productive conversation today.
Oh, absolutely. And there's something that you corrected me on off screen, and you are a master at this stuff, so I'm more than willing to eat a bit of humble pie. That I was wrong about capitalism being a zero-sum game, and why exactly is that not a non-Marxist incorrect position to view the system? Just go and read it.
So there are many different theories of what capitalism is, of how it behaves, of what are the different relationships that occur in capitalism. And one of the fundamental aspects of capitalism is that in the basis, so when we look at capitalism in a very simple way, we only look at what we can call, the ground, and we don't penetrate on the deeper than the surface. Okay, when we look at the surface, we see exchanges. Okay, that are voluntary, depending on how you define voluntary. Okay, we can get here on philosophical definitions, but we get exchanges that are voluntary, and we get exchanges that are primarily of equal. Okay, of equal worth. Okay, so, and this is part also of what the labor theory of value is okay. So commodities exchange according to their values. And what are their values? What determines their values? This is what we can answer with the labor theory of value. But in the surface, okay, now we are, of course, abstracting here from many different things that now we can include. But if we look at capitalism, in a very simple way, at the level even of the Austrian economists, okay, they are right that capitalism lies, in a veneer of freedom, because people are free to choose between different things. They are not institutionally, okay, legally coerced to do any particular thing except for paying taxes, okay, and other things, of course. But they are in principle, they are not, let's say, as unfree as they would otherwise be in a slave-based society or in a feudal society. Okay, and at that level, we can say that capitalism is, in a sense, harmonious. That capitalism doesn't lead us to believe that there would be any problems, that there wouldn't be any exploitation or anything going on. But Marx, okay, went beyond that. He understood that, sure, maybe there's some truth in this story, okay, about capitalism being about equal things being exchanged, okay, things of the same worth being exchanged, and so on and so forth. But, okay, he understood that if you go deeper, you find a phenomenon that is called exploitation, which is surplus value. It's the extraction of surplus value, and that this phenomenon is the one that actually explains the turbulences in capitalism. So the turbulences, I mean the problems that we find in capitalism, and that it also explains the inequality that capitalism brings about, which is systematic. Okay, it's a systematic inequality, and it also brings about systematic unemployment. There's a lot of people that, because they have very simplistic models, believe that unemployment is, let's say, an anomaly, that capitalism should, if left alone, produce full employment. But Marx's point is, yes, even if we accept, okay, the principles that commodities exchange according to their values, that labor power exchanges according to its value, even if we accept that, capitalism still produces persistent unemployment. That is one of the phenomena that Marx described, and that is the theory of persistent unemployment, right? And we can explain that through his own theory of competition, which is not a theory of perfect or imperfect competition, okay? And that is why capitalism is not a zero-sum game, because it is true that at some level, okay, there is economic gain in exchange, okay? I exchange something with you, I gain in utility because I have obtained something that I wanted from you, and you have obtained something that you wanted from me. However, if we look at the production process, if we look at the relationships of production, there is where we find the troublesome stuff.
Yeah, because it isn't necessarily the exploitation isn't in the unequal exchange. Because
Exactly.
the exploitation is hidden behind, at the very least, the surface value, the contract between wage labor and capital. And at face value, it seems like a fair exchange because within the context of the capitalist system, it is. It's just the act of performing the labor is not as valuable as the product of the labor. And the value of the performing of the labor is whatever the hell it takes to reproduce the worker. But it's always going to be less than what the actual value of the products are. And it is the difference between people's ability to do work and the work that they've actually done, which is the surplus value that ends up in the hands of the capitalists.
Yeah, so let me say something here because Marx, defines two broad ways of aggregate profits emerging. Okay, there are two, let's say, general ways of profit being emanating from a given society. From especially if we talk about a capitalist society. Okay, now these two different ways are one, what Marx calls profit on alienation. Okay, and profit on alienation is profit that is due to unequal exchange. And Marx says that this is existing. It exists in capitalist societies, certainly, that's for sure. But he says that this is not the fundamental source of profit, of aggregate profits in capitalist societies. What is the fundamental source of aggregate profits in capitalist societies? Well, what it is surplus value. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's why we reach the thesis, which is the thesis of the theory of exploitation, which is there are no aggregate profits without aggregate surplus value.
Right. So I've got some questions that admittedly I sent you so you could prepare for them, but let's go ahead and get into these. I already know the answers to most of these. I'm just posing these because I'm kind of trying to play devil's advocate, and because these are a lot of the types of questions you'll typically hear from right-wingers. And I mean, it depends. There are educated right-wing economists that have deeper criticisms and deeper questions than this. And then there are many, I'm not going to name any names, of course, that their entire understanding of Marxist theory is based on a complete misrepresentation, something you'd hear off of PragerU. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. At the heart of Marxist econ is the labor theory of value. Could you describe what it is?
Yes. So the labor theory of value is it is a theory of value, and first we need to describe what theories of value try to explain, right? Before we even get to the particular case of the labor theory of value. Now, when we are talking about value, okay, when we're talking about a law of value, we're first trying to describe something that happens that is specific to economies where production for exchange is generalized. Okay, now those are capitalist societies, of course, right? There is production for exchange, and it is generalized. It is not sporadic. Okay, there's no one single producer that it produces for exchange, but it is a rather general form of production. Now, if we're explaining, if we're talking about these societies and we want to explain something about these societies, okay, then we need to say which thing about these societies we want to explain. And this is the proportion with which commodities, the commodities that are produced for exchange with one another in the market. Okay, that is what a theory of value is trying to aim at. We're trying to explain these proportions. Okay,
yeah.
Why do I need to give?
Yeah, I apologize. It's the source of natural prices, correct?
Yes, fundamentally, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, is what determines relative prices in the long run, because relative prices tell us these proportions. Okay, if something is worth $1 and another thing is worth $1 too, we know that these commodities exchange in a 1-to-1 proportion. So that's why the relative price, which is 1/1, which is 1, tells us this proportion. Okay, so it tells us the exchange value of one commodity in terms of the other. Now, commodities have many different exchange values in this way. So exchange value is a property of commodities that Marx says is relative, because you can express that property in many different ways. You can say that 1 kilogram of wheat is equal to 10 kilograms of corn to X kilograms of iron, whatever, right? And in these societies, okay, where production is generalized, there is some kind of a social pressure towards a general, let's say a universal commodity appearing that reflects the exchange value, okay, so that reflects, let's say, the price of all commodities.
Like gold.
Like gold, for example.
Or oil.
And then in more advanced societies, we even abstract from commodity money and we get to fiat money. Fiat money doesn't have any intrinsic value like gold does have, okay, because gold is also a commodity. Fiat money doesn't have that, but it is nevertheless money. And we can still talk about relative prices within this context. But of course, if we are trying to talk about a theory of inflation, in this case, we need to present a different theory than the one for commodity money. Now, it's going to be based on the same fundamental principles, but it is going to be also different because we're talking about a different form of money. But nevertheless, price, okay?
Yeah.
We see that it emerges, okay, from these societies. There is this need. Why? Because exchange is generalized, okay? And it is much easier for exchange to be generalized when you're not doing barter, when you actually have, let's say, of a universal currency that everyone accepts and that everyone is willing to pay and receive payment from. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, we were talking about relative prices, okay? So they are expressed in, they represent, to put it in a better way, they represent the exchange values of commodities. Like I was saying, something is worth $1, something else is worth $1. The proportion with which these commodities exchange in the market is 1.
Right.
Now, this is what we're trying to explain. Why is it 1, okay, and not 2 or 3 or 0.5? Why is this proportion 1? And it might seem like a trivial question, okay? It might seem like a trivial question, like, why would we need to answer this? But it's nevertheless important because it can tell us a lot of things about the behavior of capitalist societies. And it is also, in economics, this is also a theory that is the subject of many different conflicts between schools. So Schumpeter even knew, okay? He was an Austrian economist, in case somebody doesn't know who Schumpeter was. He even knew that where value, okay, so the issue of value is where entire theoretical blocks, okay, entire theoretical buildings are built upon. They are built upon the theories of value. And this is why they are so important. What are we trying to explain? Relative prices. How do we explain it? Maybe if you want to interject.
No, the original question is, the original question I was asking was your description of the labor theory of value or the law of value. You sort of took 10 steps before that and explained like why it is and what the relevance is, as well as like we were about to get into the contending theories, and I do want to talk about the contending theories in a moment, but I was just asking if you could just describe specifically the LTV for me real quick.
Yeah, I was getting to that. So I was getting to that. So
Go on.
How do we explain within the context of the Marxist school of economics and also the context of the classical school? Because even in the Marxist school, there are different strands, okay? So there are people that have different opinions.
Different ideas.
But if we look at Marx's own writings, okay, and we try to be as literal in reading Marx as possible, we find, okay, that this theory is a theory that says that it is relative labor times that explain relative prices.
Yeah,
okay?
There we go. Yeah.
Not only they explain their level, but they also explain their changes through time. This is something that Marx also said. Okay, that changes in relative prices imply, okay, lead to changes in relative prices. Okay,
Gotcha.
If something before took, let's say, 1 hour to produce, and now it takes 0.5, we have had a reduction of half, and it means that when we look at it in relative terms with other commodities, this is also going to be expressed.
But wait! I thought in order for things to be valuable, I thought people had to want them. Isn't value a subjective thing that I just feel like something is valuable because I want that much? You know, what is it with the subjective theory of value? Why is it the labor theory of value that you think is correct? Why don't things have value? Because people want them, you know?
Well, here we need to make a distinction that is, let's say, a really important distinction in philosophy, which is that between necessary and sufficient conditions. Okay, so a sufficient condition is one that is not only necessary, but it is also the full extent, the full account of that thing that you're trying to explain. That would be a sufficient condition. But a necessary condition is one that it is necessary, so we wouldn't have an explanation if we didn't have that condition, but it is not the full picture. Now, what Marx tried to do in the very first pages of Das Kapital is explain why utility is a necessary condition for there to be value, but it's not a sufficient condition. Okay? It is not a sufficient condition to explain relative prices. And how does he, to put it briefly and to put it as neatly as I can, why does he think that this is the case? Okay, so he says, commodities are, and this is the very first page of Das Kapital, okay? Commodities are objects that are outside of us, and they satisfy human needs and wants, okay? And it is the property of satisfying human needs and wants, utility, that turns them into use values, okay?
Yeah,
but this is nevertheless unimportant when it comes to their exchange values. No, it is important because if nobody wanted to pay for something, there would obviously not be a price for that thing.
Yeah. So in order for something to have value, it has to have a use value. But just because it has a use value doesn't mean that's not the point at which the value is created.
It doesn't even mean that it has value, okay? Because I can, the other day I was debating with Ubersoy and I told him, I can easily say that the food that I ate for dinner today was a use value. It was an object that was useful. It satisfied some human need and want, which was mine, okay? But it is nevertheless not a valuable object, okay? The food that I ate is not valuable object because it is only for personal consumption. It is only for my personal consumption. I am not exchanging that food to anyone, for anything. I'm just eating it myself. So that is why production for personal consumption is not a form of, let's say, value creation. Now, it is a form of production because you're producing things, but they are not valuable things because you're not, because value is, as I'm going to be defending right now, and it's also going to become obvious through this analysis, why subjective theories of value are, let's say, not well enough in order to explain what we're trying to explain with a theory of value. Now, what we're saying is basically that the reason why is because value is a social property. And this is what they abstract from. They abstract from the societal element. But Marx wasn't afraid of talking about society. He wasn't afraid about talking about social relations. He wasn't afraid of talking about, the actual patterns that we observe between interaction of heterogeneous agents and the emergent properties of these interactions. But we nevertheless have to understand that it is a necessary condition for those objects to be useful in order to have a price and to be valuable. But it's not that which explains their price relative to other things. And what is it? It's labor time. And now you want, I can give a brief description of why.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, so there are many different ways, okay, but we can take, let's say, one approach, which is that when we are talking about social processes and we're talking about social properties, okay, we need to understand that they are objective and that they are also subject to mathematical formalization. So we need to be able to quantify, okay, those things that bring about social laws. And labor times are not only, let's say, objective, but also quantifiable. They are objective and they are quantifiable. They are not dependent on anyone's mind, okay? It takes, okay, by definition, a certain amount of socially necessary labor time to produce a given commodity, okay? Now, since we can quantify this particular property and we're also specifying that it is a social property, then we can ask the question, what is the relationship of these to relative prices? And then through a theory of competition, okay, that was already present in the works of the classical economists, in Adam Smith and David Ricardo, we know that this particular social property is ultimately what determines this proportion with which commodities exchange. So Adam Smith already said, okay, if it takes twice as much labor time to produce something, and there's also a difference, okay, before I even get to this, there's a difference between the conception of labor time in the classical economists and in Marx, because Marx, in a sense, included more caveats. Now, one of those caveats was talking about socially necessary, and socially necessary not only means the average amount of time that is required to produce a given commodity with the average technical conditions, but also the average amount of labor time that is required with the average technical conditions to produce a given commodity, a given bundle of commodities that is going to be condoned by demand in the market. It is also important. Okay, it is going to be condoned by demand in the market. That is also part of what socially necessary means. Okay, that there is social demand for it.
Yeah.
A given bundle of commodities. And this is an improvement of Marx's definition over the definition of the classical economists. But even they already understood that it is labor time, although they're more concrete, they're more, let's say, they're less, they're less abstract and in my opinion, accurate definition of what labor time is. Okay, of what the labor time that we're talking about is.
So Marx provided what was the original labor theory of value according to Smith and Ricardo, and how?
So it is basically this. If it takes twice as much of labor time to produce something than another thing, then that thing is going to be twice as valuable in the market. So its price is going to be twice as higher as the other commodity. But they didn't specify that the labor time that we're talking about is not concrete qualified labor time, but rather abstract simple labor time.
Yeah. So
and that is what Marx did.
Yeah. So if you could explain what exactly is the difference between simple and abstract labor, just.
So the difference between concrete and abstract labor time is that concrete is the labor time of any particular person engaging in any particular labor activity. Okay, so let's say that I produce tables. Okay, so I have that particular labor time. It takes a given labor time to produce that table, and I am the one employing that labor, and my labor in that sense is concrete. But when we're talking about these social processes, they tend to be abstract. So they tend to abstract from what makes everything concrete. So in the market, and what Marx says basically is that in the market, okay, exchange produces an abstraction from the particular properties of commodities that make them unique. Okay, so when we exchange things, we are not concerned with the particular properties. Okay, in the sphere of exchange, the particular properties that make commodities individual, that make commodities different from other commodities, they are abstracted from, and the only property that remains is the property of them having a quantitative worth, okay, an exchange value. And it is this abstraction that the market does, that is not done by economists, it's an abstraction that the market does, okay?
Yeah.
It is this very abstraction that tells us that there is also an abstraction of the labor time that goes into the production of those commodities.
Right. So next question I got here, just to clarify, I mean, you already kind of explained this, but I just want to have it out there. Just the difference between value and use value, just real quick. I mean, you've already kind of explained it, but I want to get through it.
Yeah. We can get through this very quick. So use value is, again, it is basically, okay, when we talk about use value, we talk about objects of social use. Okay, we talk about objects that have the property of satisfying human needs and wants. Okay, this is what Marx says. It is the utility of an object that makes it a use value. Now, what value is abstract, socially necessary, direct and indirect labor time. Now, it is different, okay, and it is actually different in a very profound way that hopefully when we talk more about marginalist theories, we will see why these things are different. Okay, and it is different primarily because it is a social property. Okay, and it is a quantifiable one. Okay, we cannot quantify a commodity's utility, we cannot compare it, but we can in fact quantify labor time, abstract, socially necessary, direct and indirect labor times. Okay?
Yeah. So, okay, speaking of marginalism, that was actually the next question I got coming up. What is marginalism / marginal utility? And, well, I guess overview of what it is and what your problems are with it, or what the problems are with it. For me, as far as I can tell, it's really just supply and demand, right? They explain that value is relative to supply and demand, but from what I understand, fluctuations in supply and demand explain fluctuations in the value of prices, but they don't explain the source of natural prices, basically.
So marginalism, if we're talking about marginalism in the sense of the tradition of economic thinking that relies on these concepts of utility in the margin, of costs in the margin, okay, that is a tradition that emerges, okay, from the works of the Austrian economists, okay, and also from the works of other economists that were not Austrian but that were working more or less in the same framework. Okay, and this line of thinking produced what we call the marginalist revolution in 1871, that basically and maybe we will talk about this coming up, about the transition from some economic paradigm to a different one. Okay, this produced, okay, a shift in the way in which orthodox economics was done already in the 19th century, from the classical approach, okay, of real competition, of what today and Warshak calls real competition, to the approach of, okay, capitalism being some kind of a harmonious, let's say almost perfect, and even let's say ideal system where everyone maximizes their utilities and their profits and so on and so forth. Now, this was allowed by the marginalist revolution. But in the marginalist revolution, we find a concept that is a really crucial concept for them, which is that of marginal utility. And marginal utility is the utility that you obtain from the consumption of a given object of social use, okay, in the margin. So if you were to be given an extra unit of that thing, okay, how much would my utility, my satisfaction, psychic satisfaction, be increased by consuming an extra unit of a particular good? Okay, this is basically what marginal utility is, and it is this concept that they say is innovative because it innovates from the more rigid sense of utility, pure utility, without talking about utility in the margin. And this is what Adam Smith basically was dismissing as the source of value when he said the famous paradox of value, right? It is far more expensive to purchase a diamond than it is to purchase a glass of water, even though it is far more valuable in the sense of, for our survival, a glass of water than a diamond, right?
Yeah.
And this is what basically led him to dismiss utility as being the source of value. And even Marx, okay, also had the same position, although Smith has certain ambiguities here and there. Okay, so there are different parts of the Wealth of Nations where you can get different interpretations, but this is more or less the main gist. Okay,
right.
And it is this that they claim. Okay, okay, so this transition from utility to marginal utility that they claim solves this problem of the paradox of value, because they say, sure, maybe it is far more, let's say, it is far more valuable for human beings to drink water than to have a diamond that they can contemplate and see how beautiful it is. But in the margin, okay, if you have a lot of water, having an extra glass of water is not going to be as satisfying as having a diamond. So in the margin, diamonds are far more valuable, and that is why they say diamonds are more expensive. Now this is the key issue, okay, which is that then they bring about this theory that says that, okay, it is marginal utilities that explain relative prices. Okay, it is marginal utilities. And what are my problems with this approach? Well, depending on let's say the approach that you take, and here maybe we can also talk about the neoclassical version of this conceptualization, okay, of the subjective theory of value, because neoclassical economics doesn't really have a solid theory of value. Okay, they have what you can call, a model of supply and demand. But even in the Austrian school of economics, even if you read von Mises, you will see that even the Austrians and even people like von Mises understood that the demand and supply curves are imaginary constructs, that they really don't explain anything. Okay?
I believe Paul Cockshott said that the supply and demand curve, like the original curve drawn by, forget the name of the economist,
Marshall.
Yeah, it was a non-falsifiable curve, basically. So you couldn't falsify it, so it wasn't valid as a result.
Yeah, so more or less, yeah. So unfalsifiability is certainly a part of the picture. But the main, the key important thing here is that they are imaginary constructs. Okay, they are, in a sense, let's say, simplifying diagrams that try to make a point about what consumers and suppliers are going to do with increases in prices and in quantities. Okay, but this is not, okay, this is not let's say, something that we actually observe. This is not what explains prices, especially prices in the long run. And this is something that, as I was saying, even in the in the Austrian school of economics, that they are not an orthodox school, and this is something that I point a lot.
you're telling me this doesn't explain prices? I thought
Exactly, that doesn't explain prices.
I was taught in microeconomics that this was what explained prices. This is, I
Yeah, but
didn't
it
know
doesn't. It doesn't really. It doesn't. You know what it does? It's just a diagram that, in a sense, tries to simplify, okay,
Right.
consumer and supplier behavior, so that you get some kind of a mental picture of how things more or less work. But of course, like this is like childish. Okay, nobody tries to explain prices with
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Nobody's serious, because they really don't have any explanatory power at all. Okay, at any given point in time, we only know two things. Okay, the price and the quantity at which a given commodity is sold. Okay, that is what we try to explain, especially with regards relative to all other commodities in an economy. And when you draw a couple of curves around that point, you're really not explaining the point. Okay, you're simply drawing curves that meet at that particular point and saying, well, this outcome has been brought about by the equilibrium between these different curves. Okay, but again, okay, this doesn't really have any explanatory power, and even the Austrian economists understood this. That's why they have a pure subjective theory of value, where to them it is purely marginal utility, okay, that explains this. Okay, and there are no curves that explain this. It is purely a subjective, voluntary decision made by two parties agreeing at a given point and at a given quantity at a given point in time as well. Okay, because preferences, they say, also change. And it is this particular thing which I think is the most, let's say, the most systematized version of what the subjective theory of value is. Because again, in neoclassical economics, they don't really have a notion of value. And even if you talk about perfect competition, okay, when you're in microeconomics, okay, when you start getting to the behavior of firms, okay, you're told this magnificent story that firms are price takers under perfect competition. Now, what does it mean for a firm to be a price taker? And not even the Austrian economists believe this.
Yeah.
This is why I say that they actually have a better theory of value than neoclassical economics. Okay, they don't even believe this. Why? Because of course firms are not price takers. They set prices, and even if they were price takers, who sets the prices for them? This is a question that Marx asked. Of course it is firms that set prices. Who would otherwise set the prices for them? Where do they come from? And this is a question that the Austrian economists make
Right.
to the neoclassical economists. Is, okay, you tell me that firms are price takers, but where do those prices come from? So they don't really give us an explanation for why those prices are what they are. Okay,
Yeah.
but the Austrian economists try to do this by appealing to, again, the subjective theory of value. Now, what is the problem with the subjective theory of value? Well, it is that basically it is, depending on the version that you hear from it, but it is basically that it is built, okay, in a mental gymnastic, fantastic, mental gymnastics manner, built to be unfalsifiable and unfalsified. Okay,
Yeah.
it is
And
impossible. It is impossible to talk about a falsification of the subjective theory of value, because everything in that theory, okay, is set in a way specifically and almost meticulously designed in a way for it not to be falsified.
yeah, and therefore it's unscientific. If you can't falsify a theory, then it's not a scientific theory.
Yes, and why the Austrian economists, of course, understand this, and this
well,
is why
they're
this is why
ideologically committed. That's why.
no, but you know what is better, that they understand that they don't actually have a manner of falsifying their theory. Okay, and what they say is, no, you don't understand. Economics is not about empirics. It's not about mathematical modeling. Economics is all about us presenting a set of statements, of tautological statements, that are true by definition, because tautological statements are true by definition, and those are the ones upon which we build our theories. So they claim that it is praxeology, okay, it is this methodology that they have, praxeology, that basically, in a sense, solves the problem of how are you going to falsify your theory. Because if there's anything that has become obvious from Karl Popper onward, is that a good scientific theory is one that produces testable hypotheses.
Yeah.
Now, why exactly is the subjective theory of value unfalsifiable? Okay. Now, maybe if you want to get to this question, maybe we can touch on it a little bit. It is a really complex topic, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But
yeah, I want. It's fine. We can get into that in a second, but there was something I wanted to say. There is a meme that I've seen multiple times over my years browsing the internet, and it's a picture of von Mises' face like photoshopped on a wizard, and there's like magic like colors coming out of his hands. He's like this, and it's the quote where he basically says praxeology doesn't need any scientific evidence or verification or falsification. So it's like literally magic. It's literally make believe. It's like a religion, but without like Jesus and prophecy. Instead, it's more of a dogma than it is like a scientific theory, basically.
Yes, I mean, so they like to disguise their theories as being, perfectly rational, perfectly scientific, and they actually even smear at our theories as unscientific, unfalsifiable. But they never ask themselves, are we really doing something that is better analytically than than what the classical and Marxist economists were doing and what
Right.
they are doing today? Is it really something that they're doing which is better? Because even the people that have made certain falsifiable statements within the Austrian School of Economics have failed to be met by empirical success. In some instances, yes. But for example, if you know anything about Hayek, you know that he systematized a business cycle theory that is known as the Austrian business cycle theory, and that when tested empirically, this has been shown basically to not be empirically successful. But when you hear, for example, Austrian economics talk about the 2008 financial crisis, they always give you this very nice story, and this is
Right.
this is even a really nice story. Like when I hear this story, it even sounds like oh my god, like it's really nice. But it's nevertheless a fantastical story. That is the
Right.
problem. When you tell fantastical stories, 99% of the time they are going to be not rigorous enough, not scientifically accurate. And okay, so they tell you a really nice, fantastic story about how the interest rate was very low because the central bank set it that way, and this is what drove people basically to make investments that otherwise they wouldn't have made,
Yeah.
and this is basically what led to the financial crisis. But okay, uh, there's a certain bit of truth there, but again, when tested empirically, okay, in a rigorous manner, not in a fantastical storytelling way, and there are Marxists also that engage in this unscientific modus operandi. Okay, the modus operandi of telling fantastical stories and pretending like those fantastical stories with certain bits of truth are empirical corroboration of your theories, but that is not how empirical corroboration is attained within a scientific field. Okay, you need to have systematic, peer-reviewed scientific studies. Okay,
Right.
where you
Right.
employ a given methodology, where you set a criteria for falsifiability, and where you basically get rigorous data and you try to falsify it, whether using econometric tools or whatever tools you wish. But
Yeah.
that is how falsifiability is done, not by
I
telling stories.
All right. So finally, I'm trying to get to this question because it's actually really important. So it turns out that Marx was correct about the labor theory of value or the law of value, and that modern economic research, such as the data that you sent me from Anwar Shaikh, which admittedly I never got around to reading, but I would like to open that up and take a look at it. But before that, back in Marx's day, he didn't have a way to mathematically prove the law of value or correlate commodities with labor times. So I believe this at the heart of this is what is called the transformation problem, right? Basically, how do you transform value or to prices, so to speak? So like the transformation problem, what do you know of it? And who are some, I guess, prominent economists who used this criticism against Marx and the LTV?
Okay, so this is a central question within Marxist economics. Okay, the transformation problem, but it is
Yeah.
a question that is really technical, and it has been, in a sense, obscured by many people, and it actually has been the product of a lot of confusion. Okay, but thankfully we have had very serious people who have shaded light into this question and actually given us, a good understanding of what this problem is and why it is not
Yeah.
in reality a problem, why it is actually a procedure that has a beginning and an ending point. Okay, and
Yeah.
why there are certain conclusions that do not mean that the labor theory of value is incorrect. Okay, so let me try to with talking, just waving my hands, because for this you need mathematical formalisms and you need a numerical example to see it properly. But by waving my hands, I'm going to try to make an explanation of what this of what this problem is. Okay, and so first of all, theories are never proven. Okay, proof is a this is just an interjection. Okay, so proof is a specifically formal term that applies to mathematics and to formal logic. Okay, and when you prove something, okay, you're basically showing a formal procedure to show that whatever you're trying to prove basically is follows, okay, deductively from a given set of premises. Now, when we are doing science, and when we are, and this is again, following the Karl Popper. Okay, when we're doing science, we don't prove theories; we rather falsify them, and if we find evidence that corroborates them, we say that they are that they have been, let's say, corroborated, but that they nevertheless could be wrong at some point. We can find evidence that disproves them. Okay, so you can never prove, but you can always disprove.
Theories are not facts. The whole point of a theory in science is to explain the facts. The way that you disprove a theory is by providing a better explanation for whatever the phenomenon is that you're trying to
explain. By showing that the data doesn't conform with that theory.
Yeah, exactly. So
now let's get to the transformation problem. So in the first volume of Das Kapital, okay, Marx is talking about commodities as exchanging with one another according to their values. Okay, so the set of prices that are the natural prices in that particular analytical stage, the natural prices, okay, are direct prices. So they are directly proportional to labor times, to direct and indirect socially necessary labor times. Okay, now this is all very analytically simple, but if you include certain caveats, you find that there are certain things that you need to do in order to bring more concretion to the picture. Okay, now Marx does this in volume 3 of Das Kapital. Okay, and what he's basically trying to show there is that profit rate equalization in the face of different differing organic compositions of capital, which for anyone that doesn't know what the organic composition of capital within Marx's is the ratio. It is the ratio of constant capital to variable capital. Okay. Now, if industries have different organic compositions of capital, okay, different industries have different, profit rate equalization implies that there is going to have to be a systematic deviation of relative prices from relative labor times. Okay, so there's going to be a systematic deviation of prices from being directly proportional to labor times. Now, this can bring a problem, okay, because in this case, the simple labor theory of value of volume 1 no longer seems to hold. And this is why Menger, for example, who was critiquing Marx when he went to volume 3 of Das Kapital, and maybe didn't read the full extent, because Marx certainly had certain answers there. He said this is a contradiction. Okay, and this is the famous talk about the contradiction between volume 1 and volume 3 of Das Kapital. Okay, a lot of people who don't know what the transformation problem is or anything, they always go back to this meme. Okay, is the contradiction between volume 1 and volume 3, but there is no contradiction here. There is just an specification of the theory. And what this specification is basically is that, yes, okay, if we allow for the fact, okay, and this is an undisputable fact, that different industries require different capital intensities, okay, and therefore they have different organic compositions of capital.
Mm-hmm.
If we allow for this fact, and we also accept that, and there are people that have tried, like Paul Cockshott, to, in a sense, solve this problem or just like throw it away, the problem, by saying that profit rates don't get equalized. Okay, but if we follow Marx and we say, yes, profit rates get equalized, okay, and we accept that there are different organic compositions of capital between industries, then we need to allow for the fact that there's going to have to be a systematic deviation between relative prices and relative labor times. Now, we can talk about the size of this deviation, okay, and what the implications, the analytical implications are. But what the main criticism has been of Marx here is that he left his procedure, his transformation procedure, which is a transformation not from value to price, but from a form of value to a different form of value. Okay, right. This is important because all monetary categories are forms of value. This is the difference between value and form of value. Okay, Value is abstract, socially necessary, direct and indirect labor time, which is always and everywhere different from price and monetary categories. So
Right.
surplus value is different from profits. Okay, it's always different. But nevertheless, we theorize that they are going to have to be proportional, or they are going to have a very close relationship one to the other. Okay, this is what we say. But the forms of value are different from value itself. Okay, and this is why I say that this transformation says, okay, we start from the simple labor theory of value, which says that the form of value of direct prices is the one that basically serves as the center of gravity of market prices. Okay, so
Right.
the natural prices are direct prices. And now we allow, because we know that there are different organic compositions of capital between industries, we allow for the fact that through profit rate equalization, this relationship is no longer one of direct proportionality. Okay.
Right.
And what Marx says is, okay, so we know that commodities understood as outputs, okay, their prices now are going to reflect an equalized profit rate, and they're not going to be directly proportional to labor times. Now he said we need to feed back this effect, okay, of this transformation from one form of value into another one, from commodities understood as outputs to commodities understood as inputs. Okay. Now he didn't get to do the full procedure. Okay, he didn't get to do the entire procedure, but he nevertheless said that this procedure can be done and that he is planning of doing it. Of course, Marx died and he only published volume 1 of Das Kapital. So like
Yeah.
he never finished, okay, volume 2 and volume 3. They were compiled by Engels, okay, who did what he could by taking the notes of Marx, okay, to get them together. So of course Marx never finished his procedure, but he nevertheless set the basis, set, let's say, the steps of what you need to do in order to fully finish this procedure. So the criticism is, okay, Marx didn't finish his procedure because prices of commodities as inputs are still untransformed. Okay, they haven't been transformed. Marx says you can transform them by feeding back the effect. Again, and this is something that again I can show you with a numerical example, but that I cannot show you like with my hands. But hopefully it will be somehow intelligible.
I was just about to say I was going to open the screen back up, and I was going to share the document that you sent me from Anwar Sheikh, Marxist theory of value and the transformation problem. Is there a particular?
If you want to go to the back, like to the very back, there's a couple of tables.
All right.
No, like during the mathematical appendix, before that.
Okay.
There are a couple of tables here. Let me see if I can see them because like
there they are. I think is this it?
So there they are. Okay. So these are the tables. Yeah. So these are the tables. Okay. So what this is the numerical example basically that shows this fact. Okay. And this is what he says. Step 1A. Okay. So we have 3 departments. Okay, which are Marx's famous 3 departments. Okay. And this we can conceive them as industries. Okay, an economy with 3 industries. And we have, okay, I forgot the notation for this. Okay. But this, I think it's like the monetary, like the notation here, I forgot it, but these are the money categories, okay? I think that these are monetary costs. Maybe these are profits, and maybe maybe these are these are the money costs, okay? Let's say these are the money costs.
Maybe
and then in the different.
Maybe he says if we look around, he might have.
No, so he has them. He has them like throughout the paper. He has them. Okay, so it's going to be hard to find the notation here, but like let's see, like we can do some kind of an approach here. And then here we have the value categories. Okay, this CI, this is constant capital, variable capital, surplus value. Okay, now basically what he's doing here is he's showing that within the given initial set of prices, okay, if profit rates, okay, if they are directly proportional to labor times and there are different organic compositions of capital between industries, that profit rates, which are here, you see the RI and the percentage sign, you see that they are different.
Yeah.
Okay, between the 3 different industries. Okay, and what he says here is, okay, now what we need to do is we need to do the first step, which is Marx's transformation. Okay, step 1B, which is to basically equalized around the average. Okay, and this is we need to be more specific when we talk about profit rate equalization, because profit rates don't get equalized around the averages, but this is basically at this analytical stage what we're doing here. Okay, and the average between these 3 different numbers is 29.63. okay, and basically what he says is that prices are transformed from direct prices to what now are prices of production. Okay, And this new set of prices, basically of commodities as outputs, brings about equalized profit rates. But now these prices are no longer proportional to labor times. And he also here includes multipliers, because these are the multipliers, okay, that give you the equalized profit rates, and they are the ones basically that solve, let's say, for this problem. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, what is the critique is Marx never fed back these effects of commodities as outputs into them as inputs. So then what is the step 2a? It is cost prices are adjusted to reflect price of production, okay, of step 1b. Okay, so we feed back the effect. And then we continue this procedure, okay, in the same manner as in these two steps. We continue this procedure through an iterative process, okay, and this is what is known as an iterative solution to a system of simultaneous linear equations, okay. And we continue this, and in the mathematical appendix he explains basically how you can do this. Okay. And we find a final step, which is one where we have equalized profit rates, okay, and commodities reflect, okay, this transformation of prices both as inputs and as outputs, okay. Now, what happens at this point, okay? What happens at this final step? What happens is that prices are still not proportional to labor times. So then somebody can say, okay, therefore the labor theory of value is incorrect, because prices are no longer proportional to labor times. Now, what is the key issue? And Warshaik talks about this empirically in his next paper. So this is one, and then he has another one where he talks about the empirical size of these deviations.
Do you want me to pull it up?
You can pull it up, but like there's many different papers that then talk about this, like my thesis, for example, the empirical deviations, okay, between these sets of prices.
If there's anything else you'd like me to present, just send it to me over Discord and I'll pull it up on screen. If you've got your Discord.
Yeah, I would then need to find it, but like in any case, let me just like finish more or less this explanation, and then we can talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the key issue now is to say, okay, so there's no longer a direct proportionality between prices, okay, and labor times. Now, what this means is that the centers of gravity of market prices are no longer direct prices. They are what we call prices of production. And what are prices of production? They are prices that reflect the outcome, the competitive outcome of equalized profit rates, and at the same time, okay, the deviation, the systematic deviation of relative prices, of relative natural prices from relative labor times. And then the question is, what is the empirical size of the disturbance factor? Which, and Warshaik shows this in the next paper, okay, he basically shows this through a decomposition of price that I also did in my thesis, okay. He shows basically that even theoretically, so even before going to the empirical data, now because you need to provide a theory, of course, you can find that this disturbance factor is basically going to be the relative profit to wage ratios, okay? And because these are integrated profit to wage ratios, the vertical integration of these profit to wage ratios implies that the dispersion between industries is going to be small, okay? Because they're weighted averages. Okay. And this, again, you need to see this mathematically, but like I explained this in my thesis, and he explains, and Warshaik explains this in his last book and in the paper, and the next paper after this one that he published on the labor theory of value. Okay, and basically what he says is that theoretically we already have a good argument to say that the deviation, okay, so the disturbance factor is going to be very small. So the deviation between price of production and labor times is going to be very small, okay. And this is why, because relative profit to wage ratios are going to be very small, because vertical integration of these profit to wage ratios implies that they're going to be closer together than they would be than the direct profit to wage ratios, okay. So if you take a ratio of two things that are very close together, the ratio is going to be very close to 1. And a disturbance factor that is very close to 1 doesn't produce a high deviation, okay. Now, again, you need to see this mathematically, okay, but I'm just waving my hands. Hopefully this makes sense to somebody.
Do you need me to stop sharing so that we can see better?
Maybe maybe we can do if you put like paint, maybe we can draw like a couple of equations so you can see
here. I mean, I got a Paint document open now. Let me go ahead and full screen again. I don't know exactly what you want me to draw. I mean, if you'd like to draw your whatever you're trying to draw in Paint, or I can just do it for you. It's whatever.
Yeah, so we're just trying to do a couple of equations, okay?
Yeah.
So try to put like try to put a division, okay? So a division, a fraction of p, okay? So write p and below the p write a small I, okay?
Oh, like a like
a
a
pi,
a
p sub
subscript
I, yeah.
Piece of I. All right. So piece of I.
And divided by p sub j, let's say, okay?
All right. P sub j.
And then say that is equal to L sub I over L sub a j times, and write an O. Let's say write an O. L sub j.
I over L a sub j, and then what?
So L sub I over L sub j, no a sub j.
Oh, L sub j. I gotcha.
Yes, and then multiply that by O. Let's say O. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, okay, what we're trying to say here is that within, okay, the context of direct prices, this O is equal to 1.
Okay. Within the context of direct prices, O is
which means that the price of a given industry, of industry I over industry J, is going to be equal to the ratio of the labor time required to produce a unit of the commodity of industry I over the labor time, socially necessary to produce 1 unit of industry J. Okay.
All right. And what is the
now?
What is the ratio? So O's ratio, right?
So now, what does this O? What is this O? Okay, within the context of prices of production. Okay, it is the vertically integrated profit to wage ratios.
Right.
Okay. Now, what this means is that if, okay, and then write like an equation below that.
All right. Yeah.
Say that O is equal to, and say write like MI over MJ.
MI over MJ. I'm assuming M is money.
No, so M is the profit to wage ratio, okay? The vertical integrated profit to wage ratio.
Okay.
Okay, so what this means is that like if you do the price decomposition and then you reach this point, okay? And this is something that, again, I show in my thesis, okay? And this requires more time to explain. But if you do this price decomposition, you find that this ratio, okay, is so that this is basically going to be the relationship that you get between relative price and relative labor times, okay? Now, if there are different organic compositions of capital between industries, MI and MJ are going to be different. And the fact that they're different means that this ratio is no longer 1. So no longer there is a direct proportionality between prices and labor times.
Wait, and hold on. Could you explain that again? Why exactly is that?
Okay, so if MI and MJ are equal, the ratio is equal to 1.
Yeah.
Right?
And
so which means that P sub I over P sub J is equal to L sub I over L sub J, which means that the individual price is going to be directly proportional to the individual labor time, and the individual price in the second industry is going to be directly proportional to the individual labor time in the second industry.
Okay.
Now, if this ratio is different to 1, and it is very different to 1, then the deviation between relative prices and relative labor times is going to be very large. But, okay, since, and this is what he shows, since vertical integration of the profit to wage ratios, which are the MI and the MJ, implies that they are going to be closer together, okay, than the direct profit to wage ratios of those two industries, because a profit to wage ratio, a vertical integrated profit to wage ratio, is a convex combination, okay, of all of the other profit to wage ratios.
All right.
Okay, so it's a weighted average of all of the other profit to wage ratios, which means that the dispersion between these profit to wage ratios is going to be small, or it's going to be at least smaller than that between the direct profit to wage ratios, which means that MI over MJ is going to be not a very large factor. It's going to be closer to 1. It's going to be relatively close to 1.
Okay.
So theoretically, we say this is why we think that there is not going to be a very high deviation, even in the face of the transformation problem between relative prices and relative labor times. Now we go empirically. Okay, what does the empirical data tell us about this deviation? And for that, we need to do something which is compute, okay, empirically, with the data provided to us by input-output tables. And this is, again, what I did in my thesis for the Spanish economy. Okay, we calculate direct prices and prices of production.
Right.
And we also have the market prices that are given, okay, by the input-output tables.
All right.
And basically what we do, okay, is we look through measures of vector distance, okay, because these prices are collected in a vector, okay? And these prices for all the industries are collected by a vector. Okay, and in this case, we're talking about a row vector. Okay. Now, if we look at the distance between these different vectors, we expect there to be a very small distance between direct prices and prices of production. And this is exactly what we find, which implies that the disturbance factor is in fact not very large. And also we say that it is price of production that serve as the centers of gravity of market prices. So market prices have to be very close to price of production as well. And this is something that we also find empirically. And then we say, okay, changes in these relative prices, okay, so if you include, can you write, like, do you have like a delta sign there?
I mean, I can just put down a D, like
okay, no, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because it's just going to confuse this. Okay, so imagine that there is a change in this in the relative prices. Okay, maybe over a given year. Okay, so from one year to another one, there's a change in relative prices. So what our theory says is that this change is going to be explained by a change in the labor times.
All right. So how am I writing this down?
No, you don't even need to write this down, okay?
Okay.
This is just like, okay, so you can write this formally, okay, but to put it just conceptually, so we don't get, so we don't continue, with all of this. Conceptually, you can see, okay, from this equation that what we see is that if this factor is really small, okay, it doesn't really matter that much, that through time, the changes in relative prices are going to be explained by the changes in relative labor times. And this is another hypothesis. And in this one, we can use regression analysis, okay, so time series regression methods in order to solve, okay, in order to see whether or not this is the case. And what we find is that this is in fact the case.
All right. So
we have two hypotheses that have been basically empirically corroborated in many different countries, okay, in time spans covering many different years.
All right. And
this has to do with the transformation problem, okay?
Right.
If we see that these deviations are empirically small, then we have empirical reasons to say that the transformation problem is really a non-issue.
Yeah. Okay. I hope that was a satisfying answer for the audience. Personally, I think I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to the stream a couple times because it was very difficult for me to follow along with that, but I tried to do my best. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to some. Okay, so that pretty much covers that question. So what are some common, going back to the LTV, what are some common misrepresentations that you're aware of? Like, I mean, I know you had you can't really call it a debate, but you had that debate with Ubersoy, where the entire premise of his arguments, like from start to finish, were basically just complete straw men of the theory. He didn't even understand the ideas or concepts that he was even arguing against. So it was just fractally wrong from the onset. So I don't know. What are some of the more cheesy misrepresentations you're familiar with of the LTV?
Well, I mean, there are plenty misrepresentations.
Yeah, I've heard people bring up like paintings, like, okay, well, what about paintings?
So maybe we can start with one that I responded to a while back. So there was this if you want to call it debate that Bosch did with a person, okay,
right,
where basically Bosch had this position, okay, and this is a position that I've also heard from a lot of people today that basically have taken the labor theory of value and said, okay, this doesn't really work or anything of the sort. They don't really understand it, okay, so they don't really know what it is or anything of the sort, and they say that the labor theory of value is basically this abstract, philosophical, purely, solely abstract philosophical theory about how commodities should be valued, like even if something doesn't have any demand, and this is what Bosch was saying, even if something doesn't have any demand, or it's not wanted by many people, we should still say that it is valuable because there's labor that went into it, and that is what the labor theory of value is. Now this is
No.
a very, very, very bad misconception of what
Oh
the labor
yeah,
theory
no,
of value is.
well, yeah, no. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that he said that. Bosch is an
Okay.
idiot, but yeah, no.
But this is okay. So this is one.
Yeah.
But then there are more serious misconceptions of what the labor theory of value is, and a lot of them have to do with this notion that they, in a sense, conflate. Although these two theories are related, but we nevertheless have to be able to differentiate one from the other so that we can
Yeah.
understand them together. We need to be able to understand what the differences between them. They tend to misconceptualize the labor theory of value as being the theory of exploitation. Now, the classical economists already talked about the labor theory of value without talking about exploitation. So that's why we need to understand that these are different theories, although they are highly related. And in fact, the labor theory of value is the grounds for the theory of exploitation.
Yeah.
In Marxist terms, at least. And some people say, like Ubersoy, for example, that the labor theory of value is, there's a capitalist class that steals from the workers, and that basically is, in a sense, oppressing them, and so on and so forth. Now, this is another misconception, because first of all, this is not even an accurate representation of what the theory of exploitation is. The theory of exploitation is a theory about how, in the production process, there is a creation of surplus value, and that it is this creation of surplus value that is the rock. So the fundamental aspect of the circuit of capital, of why after a given investment, the investment the money that is received afterwards is greater.
Right.
This is basically the theory of exploitation. Now,
this kind of follows through. And I'm glad you brought that up, because this kind of plays into my next question. The negative implications for capitalism because of the LTV. If the law of value holds true and is correct, what are the negative implications for the capitalist system as a whole?
Yeah, so it depends on what you really define by negative, right? Because I remember I was talking to JF Garepi, and I was talking to JF, and he was saying, you know what, I think that the Marxist understanding of capitalism, to some extent, it is correct, but I actually think this is positive. I think it is positive that there is unemployment, that there are people, that there are businesses that fail, and that are actually, people go out of business, and even if they starve, he seemed to be like very happy with all of these things. So this is something that is really important. It depends on what you refer by negative.
Yeah, no.
Do you refer by negative a moral condemnation of capitalism? Because if so, the labor theory of value doesn't necessarily point to any particular moral either appraisal or condemnation of capitalism.
Well, first off, I just want to say that it takes a special type of subhuman to think unemployment is a good thing. But I mean, I guess it depends on your perspective, but I see where you're coming from. I was more referring to the contradictions or the clashes that go on, because the implications of the LTV are going to necessitate, the very turbulence you were talking about, class warfare, business cycles, a lot of the contradictions and issues. Because if the LTV is true, and it holds right, then these are some very inconvenient facts, things that people with a lot of wealth and a lot of power are not going to want to reconcile or come to terms with or acknowledge, because it puts their legitimacy into question, basically.
Okay. So yeah, you framed the question very nicely. So what are the counter-ideological, to put it in a better sense, the counter-ideological implications of the labor theory of value? Now this is a really nice subject, because part of what let's say the neoclassical and the Austrian approaches to the question of value is basically building a system, a theoretical system that basically leads to the answer of capitalism is a smooth, it is, let's say, an ideal form of organizing production, because it leads to solid utility maximizing. Okay, and even in the Austrian school there are differences. Okay, not everyone has the same opinion. Some people in the Austrian school have an opinion closer to JF Gagepi, for example. But again, so the neoclassical, let's just say the neoclassical, okay, version of this, which is no, you don't understand. Okay, markets, if left alone, produce utility maximizing, let's say profit maximizing outcomes, and these are the outcomes that we desire. Therefore, capitalist societies are the optimal societies. Now, what Marx basically tried to say, and he tried to do with his with Capital particularly, is basically to show how even starting from the basic premises, okay, of exchange between equals, of the sphere of exchange being this apparently ideologically seemingly nice, neat, and smooth sphere, okay, even with that being the case, how we can see and how we can find, let's say, an actual explanation for the observed phenomena of capitalism, which are not perfect outcomes, okay, rather the opposite, because Marx lived in an era of the social question. He lived in an era where basically we were talking about the Industrial Revolution, and we were talking about the bad part of the Industrial Revolution, where there was child labor, where there was an increasing immiseration of the living conditions of the working class, where there was struggle, where there were many social, let's say, factors at the time that were undesirable by even the most pro-capitalist people of the time. Okay, now he was trying to explain why even in the surface, capitalism being this seemingly smooth and simple and nice system, how even with that being the case, we still get those outcomes that he observed, okay, and that everyone was aware of. And this is the implication of the labor theory of value. Okay, is if we start from the premise, okay, that it is relative labor times that explain relative market prices in the long run, okay, we can get, okay, a theory of exploitation, and from this theory of exploitation we can get, okay, an understanding of the class struggles. We can get an understanding of the different ways in which exploitation can be enhanced. Okay, are you talking about relative or absolute exploitation, for example? Okay.
I mean,
and also, no, I mean, like, that was like a rhetorical question. And also we get an understanding of deeper laws, okay, that even Smith and Ricardo already had, some kind of understanding of, like the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Okay.
Yeah.
The tendency of the rate of profit to fall, which is a tendency, okay, doesn't mean that it is that the rate of profit is always falling, and that its fall will always imply like a catastrophic decline of capitalism. Okay, because capitalism, if anything, is a system that is really capable of, in a sense, feeding, okay, from its own internal enemies. Okay, so even in the case of the inconsistencies of the class warfare, of the crisis, of unemployment, even with all of that, capitalism still manages to survive. Okay, and that's something that we also want to understand. But the implication, okay, to answer your question finally, the implication, okay, of the labor theory of value that is counter-ideological is basically that we can understand why capitalism has all of these problems that are not ideologically convenient, even in spite of accepting certain elements about the smoothness and the very, let's say, simple nature of exchange, which is not simple. Simple, I mean it in a positive sense, not in an analytical sense, because even exchange is not that analytically simple. Okay.
Yeah, uneven and unequal exchange. Of course, we could get into the falling rate of profit and talk about it, but I want to save that for once I get through all the questions I had planned. So we talked about negative implications. Now we're going to get into a little history lesson. You already kind of touched up on this, but basically the question is, why did modern economic study depart from the labor theory of value in favor of marginalism, subjectivism, and other theories of value? We both have talked about this in the past, and it's largely ideological, as far as I know. It wasn't based on any scientific revelations. It was actually done because of the said inconvenience because the LTV's inconvenient implications for capitalism and the alternatives that could be discussed or formed. It was basically to pretty much get more of a gridlock on intelligentsia, or at least the study of the economics. But I would like to hear from you why you believe modern economic study has departed from the labor theory of value over a century ago.
Yes, so there's a complex, sociological explanation of this question, and this is something that I always say that I think it's an understudied question, okay, and it is understudied because when we're talking about philosophy of science, and this is a question that is really heavy on the philosophy of science, we need to understand that social sciences, and economics is certainly, a very prominent example of this, are different from the natural sciences in one fundamental aspect, which is that, the investigator, is also part of the object of investigation. Okay, and this is not in the same way of, for example, biology. Where so the investigator is also investigating. It's also part of the object of investigation because their body is part of the object of investigation. We are not just talking about that. Okay, we're talking about the investigator being part of the ideological and of the political and of the social. Okay, which are far more ingrained within our brains. Okay, part of those factors. That they are trying to study themselves. Okay, so this is why social sciences, and in particular economics, have this problematic. Okay, because the investigator finds himself or herself also as being part of that object, and they have interests within that particular object. Okay, this is a little bit like how when we had, for example, the Nazis studying biology, they had all of these biases about, and this is not in the case of social sciences, but in the case of even natural sciences, they had all of those biases about how there had to be a superior race and how they wanted to find, the traits that would set, the white race as being that superior, more intelligent, stronger, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Now today we have this same problem, but instead of with biology and with let's say physics, for example, although it still happens, but within a lesser extent today, we still have this problem of biases of, let's say, political, emotional, even biases that, in a sense, obscure the study of economics, and this became really obvious and really, let's say, material in the time of Marx, in the late years of Marx, when we started to see, a really strong working movement emerging and challenging, not only, at the level of ideas, but especially at the level of material struggle, the position of power of the elites of the time. Okay. Now, these were, so the 19th century is a century of revolutions, of wars, and it was the start of the solid, labor movements that then inspired many of the labor activism that happened afterwards. They started to emanate in this century, and part of their, let's say, of their theory, part of their own ideology was indeed, the works of people like Marx and Engels. So what happened there was that in light of material struggle, of class conflict, not only at the level of very simple, plain, academic discourse, but at the level of actual, in the streets, fighting.
Oh yeah, no, straight up. Like labor was way more militant back then, and
of course.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's like the German Communist League had membership in the millions, but I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, so from this material struggle of that time emerged a need, to create, and this is not a conscious need that, a very specific, this is not a conspiracy theory, of very specific group of people conspiring in order to bring about a different, let's say, economic paradigm. This was more of a material need that emerged from that particular class warfare of that time.
Yeah,
it emerged the need to have a different, let's say, analytical framework for studying economics that looked at economics not as conflictual, not as exploitative, not as bringing about a set of troublesome phenomena like unemployment, like business cycles, and so on and so forth, but as an equilibrium, optimizing, morally unchallenging, system. Okay, that was the need that emerged from that particular material struggle of the time, and this became manifested in the marginalist revolution. Because before that, the classical tradition, which were very radical in the sense of talking about the labor theory of value, and even having certain talks about the falling rate of profit and so on and so forth. Okay, even in the classical tradition, they were still the orthodoxy. Okay, they were still the dominant school of economics, until it became really, really, really obvious that that system no longer served the ideological purposes, with Marx particularly, that it no longer served the ideological purposes that it was serving before. And that is why a different, let's say, theory and a different framework emerged. And through the loss, okay, of the working class movements of the time, okay, because they certainly failed, and they brought about many improvements, but they certainly failed in changing radically, in a sense, from the capitalist to a socialist, or whatever, moral production. Okay, they actually did produce many failures, and they had many internal conflicts also, the conflicts between the anarchists and the communists, and the and all of the other factions there. Okay,
Oh
now
yeah, yeah.
within this division, okay, so the dominant, okay, the theory that became dominant was that, okay, the theory of capitalism as a smooth, self-regulating, let's say, equilibrium seeking,
Yeah,
optimizing,
yeah, it
and
just
all of these
yeah.
and all of these wonderful things system. That was the image that emerged, and it slowly became solidified in the academic, you can call geist, okay, of the academics of the time. And it then became the new orthodoxy. Okay, so there was a paradigm change that did not obey, okay, any scientific improvement, but that was actually due to a given set of political struggles that were going on at the time. Now, what happened is the story didn't end there. Okay, what happened is that with the Great Depression, a new need appeared to devise a different, let's say, economic paradigm. Okay, a new need emerged, because you saw that that was a time of great economic catastrophe. Of the economists didn't see this coming. They don't explain properly how this came about. They don't have answers to how we can solve this question. And the paradigm that then emerged, okay, and overthrew the one that was dominant after the marginalized revolution and until the 1930s, was the Keynesian school of economics. But the Keynesian school of economics, even though it became the dominant paradigm, it also fell apart. It also fell apart.
The Keynesian school rose, one, as a concession, I believe. That's one reason. The other one is it was a reaction to the economic turmoil of the 1930s, because I guess modern economists came around and said, yeah, maybe this laissez-faire business isn't working out for us after all. So they started implementing a series of government programs, social programs, in the form of like the New Deal and so on. A lot of people think Franklin D. Roosevelt was like this champion of the working class. He really wasn't. He was implementing, just enough reform to lull a lot of people, like lull working class consciousness back to sleep. But the other thing that he did was he also...
And he actually brought, he brought new economic turmoil. And there are many Austrian economists that thought about it, and they are right to some extent. Okay, that even Roosevelt, in his attempt to produce, more social democrat policies, even brought about certain economic turmoil himself. Okay, so it's not this magical story about how he saved the working class.
No, not at all. 1937, we actually had another recession called FDR's recession, and it's because business was entering a capital strike because they didn't like his reforms, because they felt
so there are two questions there. Okay, it's not only the Great Depression, but also the Great Duration. Okay, why was it so long? Why was it so long? Why were the economic effects of that crisis so long lasting? And some Austrian economists have made certain arguments that it was actually the policies of Roosevelt that produced some of the economic uncertainty and some of the economic turmoil that led to the Great Duration. And there are certain bits of truth there, okay, in their account,
Yeah.
because it is true that in fact those policies have their limits, okay, and they are actually not necessarily working class saving policies, okay.
No,
They're
no.
just in a sense working class. How can we put this? Working class.
They're just they're really just concessions. They were concessions, and on the other hand, his policies also did other stuff to help business. Like he was trying to facilitate investment. So rather than implement, nationalize in the industry, like what I were in his shoes, something I would do. But to be frank with you, if I were ever to become president, if I were become most powerful man in the country, I'm just going to say this right now, I would be dead before the end of the week. So that's the first thing. But second, Franklin D. Roosevelt didn't nationalize any industry. He introduced just minor reforms and social programs, and they did grant some degree of concessions. But ultimately, one thing they did was they set up like insurance pools for like housing market investors so that to alleviate some of the risk. But yeah, like you said, part of the reason why the Depression was so long was because of the capital strike. And I don't know, you'll probably disagree with me on this, but it was really not until World War II. It was really World War II that truly jump-started the economy again. That's what really put everyone back to work.
Yeah, I mean, there is truth, in fact, in that particular statement. It was certainly the World War II that brought about a lot of economic, let's say, excitement.
Yeah,
that
Rosie
couldn't
the
actually
Riveter.
be materialized before that. Yeah, no, for sure. There's certainly truth in that. But the thing is that the Keynesian paradigm also changed because there were different material interests that also happened during the 20th century, and there were also certain theoretical, empirical, actual failures of Keynesian economics, okay, and we can talk about the Phillips curve and so on and so forth, but those are more technical, more specific. We don't need to dive too deep into those, okay. But there were certain problems, okay, in Keynesian economics that were also, shown, and because there was a need for a different economic theory that emerged from the material circumstances of the 60s, of the 70s, and of the 80s, okay, there was also a shift to a somewhat of a synthesis between the Keynesian and what was becoming the neoclassical school, okay, of the marginalized revolution.
The marginal.
And then this is what and then this synthesis is more or less today's, okay, neoclassical school of economics, okay, this synthesis, okay, where we learn a lot of Keynesian macroeconomics, but we still have the old, neoclassical models of microeconomic behavior. And this is why there is a really strong and oftentimes, if for anyone that has taken courses in advanced and even in even elementary economics, they know that there is this talk about the contradictions and the conflicts between microeconomics and macroeconomics. And they say the problem is macroeconomics. Okay, the problem is macroeconomics, but in reality, the problem is both. The problem is poor microeconomic foundations, unsound macroeconomic theories, and a general framework that really doesn't get us anywhere. And this is where we need to reivindicate, we need to bring back the works of the classical economists and of Marx, okay? And of course, of the people that made improvements like Piero Sraffa, like Luigi Pasinetti, Garegnani, and all of these people, okay? We need to go back to that line of thinking. And this is something, okay, that Anwar Shaikh, for example, has done a great deal of work in, okay? Systematizing, okay, a classical and a Marxist approach to economics into what is a solid theoretical block that can overcome the one that we currently have. And this has gained a lot of prominence ever since the 2008 financial crisis, because it was made obvious, again, from material circumstances, that the economic, okay, field of economics, so the field of economics, the academic field of economics, didn't have good theories or good answers, okay, good solutions to these questions that became materially visible in the Great Recession. Okay?
The Great Recession.
And this is also why today we have a lot more, let's say, criticisms of the neoclassical and of the Keynesian, okay, tradition, and of this synthesis that we have today between, more of a marginalist approach and a Keynesian approach. Okay, the synthesis that we have today. There are a lot of criticisms of this, and this is why there are people trying to present alternative theories. Okay,
Yeah.
and that is why we have contending schools. And this is the important thing. Okay, that economics is not a settled science. So when people try to vaguely gesture, okay, at some kind of academic consensus among economists, they need to understand that there is no such thing as that consensus. Okay,
Oh yeah.
there are different schools with different theories, with contending and and highly conflictual
Yeah. Highly
approaches.
theories.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that actually, if we truly want to have a good understanding of economics, we need to move beyond all of those memes about the true economics is the neoclassical economics, is the one that we learn. No, we need to move past all of that, and we need to understand that there are different approaches, by the way, different approaches which have a lot of not only theoretical but also empirical strength, and one of those is the one that I support. Okay.
Right. Yeah, something I wanted to say is a couple things. While ago I was arguing with this liberal who I was explaining why I was in favor of a socialist planned economy, and this guy, very frustrating conversation, but he kept asserting that like it's absurd. You can't plan an economy. Like no modern economists, no economists are in favor of a planned economy. They failed. There's no economists that are in favor of that. I'm like, actually, there are plenty of accredited economists that are in favor of similar economic policy as myself. You're just not aware of them because you're ideologically driven, or you just don't know. And this kind of leads into, I guess, the last question I have. Well, not the last, but I have a couple others, but this is the last one in the set of questions I sent you, and then I got a couple others, and then we can just go into the Q&A. But why do liberals jump through so many ideological hoops of fire to deny the labor theory of value? Like, why is it so hard for some people? I've noticed this. It's so difficult for them to believe or accept that, like, value is in general derived from the socially necessary labor time needed to reproduce commonly purchased consumer goods and commodities and services and so on. Like,
do you
why are they
mean
so,
at a public level, at a popular level, or do you mean at an academic level?
Well, I mean on a popular level, mainly. Why do you think? Because most people are not academics. Most people in general have liberal consciousness, but there are many people that are of like a conservative or more right-wing disposition that just
So in this case, the first thing that I would say is that at a popular level, there's really not even that much understanding or interest in economics. So of course there's no interest in the labor theory of value, right? But if we're talking about very specific niches, okay, of people who are not economists, who don't have many, academic, let's say, credits, and who nevertheless talk with all of that, confidence about the labor theory of value being wrong because the mod pie argument and all of that. Okay, if we are talking about these people, I think that the really nice answer is the fact that they have become convinced, okay, whether through propaganda or whether through some kind of education that they have received somewhere, okay, that these are theories that are incorrect because they don't have a proper understanding of what the theories are, of what the framework is, and they, in a sense, prioritize, okay, their own comfort, their own psychological comfort of sticking, with a poor interpretation, even in some instances where they know that they have a poor interpretation of that thing and that they don't actually have good reasons to deny, okay, its validity, okay, that in a sense they just find more comfort in staying with that belief rather than challenging it.
So
and it is also, a thing about comfort and about a lack of willingness to engage in critical thinking with your own ideas.
So it's feels over reals, basically. That's pretty much.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. That's for sure. And I have my own experiences here with people. For example, I remember Shane Killian, okay, who had all of these, he said like mathematical informed arguments against the theory of exploitation and against the labor theory of value. And when I tried with the mouthy infidel to get a debate with him so that I could show to his face why he was actually incorrect, he just faded away, like a ghost. He just faded away by saying, no, no,
Yeah,
no, 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 you don't understand. Your concepts are too technical. I don't really understand your definitions. And then
yeah. I'm
he
not
just
gonna
he
lie.
just flew.
I'm not gonna lie, man. You are a beast, at least when it comes to this subject. Like, there are points during this that, in all honesty, that's the reason why I drew the little circle, and it's just like my head, and then what you're talking about. And because there are points where I have a very difficult time keeping up with you, and I mean, you are basically on the verge of being a master's in econ. So, I mean, you are very, very well versed in this. And for those of you who haven't seen his debate with Ubersoy, I highly encourage you guys to check it out. I have never seen a public humiliation that bad in my life. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, dude. You bodied him. I think he's gonna be waking up in a cold sweat for the next 10 years, remembering that day. I think that's how bad you bodied him. That was great.
Well, I mean, he had really strongly felt positions against the labor theory of value,
Oh
and
yeah,
he didn't even have a proper understanding of it. So that's why, he, in
yeah,
a sense, acted according to what his knowledge and what his understanding of these concepts were. And he wasn't able to, in a sense, acknowledge during the debate that he actually didn't have a proper understanding of what he was trying to criticize. But
yeah,
he nevertheless was compelled, for emotional and ego reasons, related to our own
yeah.
ego, to
In,
accept that that was in fact the case, that he didn't really have a case against the labor
in,
theory of value because he
in,
didn't even understand it.
in my opinion, that debate, the second that he said that, that debate should have just been over. Like, it should have been over the second he like conceded ground on that, because that was the point of the entire debate, rather than just sitting here and arguing from a point of emotion. Like, dude, why are you trying so
But
hard to die
like
on this?
Ubersoy, to his credit, at least he, had, in a sense, let's say he had, the the self-love necessary to at least present himself there and try to defend his positions, because that's certainly something that Shane Killian, for example, couldn't do. And that is
Yeah,
something that libertarian Scott, who's another person that I was arguing
yeah,
with, that I was he made a reply to one of my videos, and President Sunday and I tried to get him to debate me on this question, endlessly, because he was making really strong statements. Okay. And he never really accepted. He always ignored the question of, okay, let's debate this. Okay. He always
yeah,
ignored that.
yeah.
Now, at least Ubersoy
At
was
least,
able to present himself in a public
yeah.
format and defend
Uh,
his ideas,
at least,
because these
yeah.
other
At
people
least he
don't.
had, yeah. I mean, at least he had the courage to actually like have his beliefs challenged. I mean, sure. Um, yeah, and I guess there's a special type of courage that goes with going to fight a battle that you have absolutely no chance of winning. So I guess you could give him credit for that. I
I
noticed
guess
though that,
Shane Killian and Libertarian Scott have read their Sun Tzu.
yeah,
They have read their Art of War, and they
yeah,
know that you shouldn't fight wars that you cannot win.
yeah. No, they're playing it smart. So I don't know. That's probably it. But yeah, you during your debate with Ubersoy, and I just took this down a minute ago. You mentioned a theory of stocks. Apparently there's a theory of stocks as to where the value of stocks comes from, and I always figured that it was just because people feel like it should be this valuable. Like, the line will go up when people want it to go up. It will go down when people withdraw their money. To me, it just seems like purely based on human psychology, like just
So
gambling with human
so
psychology.
there is
Yeah.
here we're moving, in the realm of financial economics. Okay, and financial economics has
Oh,
laws, okay, that are very close to those laws of, the material economy, but that nevertheless, have certain different pressures. Okay, now, um, normally, in order to understand properly stocks and all of that, you need to read not only especially not economists, but the actual people that are there in the financial sector working and doing trading and actually, being brokers or whatever. That is
yeah.
really the people that give you good information. And there was, I think it was George Soros. Yeah, I think it was him who had this book where he presented his theory of reflexivity. Okay.
Hmm.
And this is actually a theory that, of course, Soros is not an academic. He doesn't really have, very solid mathematically formalized theories, but he nevertheless had really good intuitions because he has spent, a lot of his time
Yeah.
in these particular fields, and he certainly has, a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, even though he doesn't have the tools to systematize it like it. But for example, on Warshaik takes, the ideas of Soros of reflexivity, and he actually makes really good statements about financial economics based on those. Now, okay, so we're talking about stocks. Okay, let me make a couple
Theory
of
of stocks.
statements about stocks. Okay.
Yeah.
And I cannot get too deep into this question right now, but let's see if we can get at least a good discussion. Okay, so even this is a really nice subject because in neoclassical economics, and normally you see this in macroeconomics, when you start to talk about stocks, okay, you suddenly have like a different approach to stocks than to other than to the real economy, because in the real economy you were told that value is subjective and that there's no fundamental value of prices, of commodities. Okay, there's no fundamental price. Okay, nevertheless, when you go to macroeconomics, okay, and when you start talking about stocks, suddenly you get this idea of the fundamental value of a stock. Now, why in financial economics suddenly we have this idea of a fundamental value of a stock, but we didn't have that before? Now, there's a speculation. I have my own speculation why. Okay. And my speculation is that because there's an actual need in financial economics to talk about fundamentals, because if you don't talk about fundamentals, you don't have any understanding, whether good or bad, of bubbles, of bubbles, financial bubbles, and then is when there can be a lot of problems. Okay, but in the real economy, you don't have the same problem.
Right. Yeah.
That's why neoclassical economics, in a sense, is compelled to present a theory of fundamentals, which the classicals already did for commodities, okay, for material commodities. In their tradition, they already had a theory of fundamentals for commodities, but they also had a theory of, they didn't systematize a theory of fundamentals for financial assets and for stocks. This is something that Warshak does. Okay, but in neoclassical economics, they drop the theory of fundamentals for the material economy, but they bring it for financial economics because there's a material need for there to be a theory. But the thing is that their theory of fundamentals is also wrong, because it is also based on certain notions of expected expectations, and of rational expectations in particular. Okay, profitability of expected outcomes of expected value. Okay, now their theory is that the fundamental value of a stock, which may not be equal to the market price of that stock, but it is nevertheless the center of gravity. And their theory of gravitation is different from the one in the classical economics, because in classical economics this is a turbulent equalization process, but in neoclassical economics this is a smooth equilibrium. So the market price smoothly converges to the fundamental price of a stock, and that fundamental price is determined by what is called the dividend discount model. Okay,
the discount model.
Yes. Okay, which is the future stream of dividends. Okay, discounted at the interest rate, and that is the fundamental value of a stock. Okay, very simple, very plain. Now I can give you some math about this, but there's no need for that. Okay.
Okay.
Now, these models, okay, of discounted values and so on and so forth, okay, they have not been met with enough empirical strength for them to be very solid. But nevertheless, Anwar Shaikh talks a little bit with the use of literature from actual people working within the financial industry, and of good financial economists that say that, of course, there's no really empirical support for all of these theories. And he says, okay, what is, based on the classical approach to this question, what is a better theory of stock prices and of interest rates, for example, and of exchange rates? Okay, what are better theories of this phenomena? And then he finds that there is indeed a theory of fundamentals of stocks as well. It is not, obviously not based on any form of labor of labor times, because stocks are not commodities in the sense of the commodities. So it is certainly not a labor theory of value, but it is nevertheless a theory of fundamentals, and it is based on the concept of turbulent equalization of profit rates as well.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I've often imagined what this world would look like if there was no stock market, if we didn't have this
It wouldn't
growth
look like it
rate.
does, that's for sure. But the stock
Yeah,
market is actually important for capitalist economies. Okay, the
yeah,
stock market and the financial sector are indeed really, really important sectors that have a lot of implications for the material economy as well. You know, if there's something that we know from the 2008 financial crisis is how important the financial sector is for a proper and a relatively smooth functioning of the material sector, of the material economy. That is something that we surely know. So that's why we also need to have good theories of financial capital
yeah,
and
yeah.
of the financial sector.
I've read a while ago. I've read quite a bit about the subprime mortgage crisis. Like I know enough. I have like a general grasp of what exactly happened, and I have somewhat of a grasp of what's going on with the COVID 2021 crisis. But um, the question that I actually have kind of prepared, and let's go ahead and talk about crisis for a bit. I want to kind of wrap up in the next 15, 20 minutes. But uh, I was going to ask you basically, like, why did it happen? I know it wasn't just COVID. I mean, I know the yield curve had inverted like at the end of 2019. I know that all of the signals, the economic signals for recession were ever so present, but like uh, how do you understand the 2020 crisis to have occurred, and what are the long-term implications of it?
So we need to understand here that normally capitalism, okay, this is part of what the Marxist understanding of crisis is that capitalism is always in a, let's say, in a struggle, okay, between uh, between a boom and a bust. Okay, so it's always in this constant struggle, and it is not like the answer that some people give that capitalism is slowly moving towards its demise. Okay, everyone is moving slowly towards their demise. Okay, but not in this sense. Okay, Marx didn't mean his theory of the business cycle to be. And at least that's my interpretation, to be a theory of capitalism is certainly going to be done within the next couple of decades. Okay, so what we need to understand is capitalism is always manifesting both signs of economic health and of economic illness. So capitalism is always manifesting this conflictive, and this is one of the aspects that make capitalism a contradictory mode of production. Because it has manifested contradictions, because it has certain things that point to it being healthy and that point to it being unhealthy. And if we were talking, for example, about unemployment, that was certainly in the US, at least, that was certainly an indicator that wouldn't tell us that we were approaching a crisis. But we indeed had certain indicators. We were talking about the yield curve. Now the yield curve is not a 100% there's going to be a crisis if the yield curve inverts. This is more of a statistical regularity that we find, that it is a good predictor of, and there's arguments of as to why. There has to be a good theory as to why, and I cannot elaborate on this, but there were certain indicators about this. But capitalist crisis always have, let's say, what we can call a determining point. Like what do you call this? A point of I'm missing out on the proper word to describe this, but they always have like the drop that fills the glass. So there's always, for a capitalist crisis to occur, that single event, a particular event that takes all of the things that we were building up and actualizes that particular crisis. Now, in our case, that event was certainly COVID-19. And why was COVID-19? Because the second that COVID-19 started to affect the population, not only when it came to Europe and to the United States, but even when it was already in China, production stopped, because capitalism is a global system. So if production stops in China, there's going to be problems for German manufacturers. And if there's problem for German manufacturers, there's problems for Spanish manufacturers and for manufacturers all around Europe. And there's also problems for the United States and so on and so forth. So basically what I'm saying is that once production stops, you initially had a very large shock to supply. Now, what happens? That there's also an inherent shock to demand that is characterized, that is brought about by this crisis, because people stop consuming suddenly, or they start consuming more of certain goods, but not of others, for which there was demand before. So the market hadn't adjusted yet.
Oh boy, was there an increase in demand for toilet paper.
Yeah.
Toilet
That's
paper
for sure. That's for
and
sure.
hand sanitizer. TP for whatever reason, but go on.
That's for sure. But
Yeah.
since in our economies we rely a lot on the tertiary sector, so we rely a lot on services,
Yeah.
these were really affected. And in Spain, in particular, we had the problem of tourism. Okay, these were particularly affected, and this brought about a lot of the economic turmoil that we now experience. Okay, that we still experience to this day. Now, it is that initial, okay, uh, in a sense, shock to supply that in a sense marked the initial steps of the crisis. And then, of course, we have the shock to demand, which was very, in a sense, damaging as well. But this also tells us how important production is. Okay, how important production is, because the second that production stops or that it is greatly reduced, suddenly we have ourselves a really big economic problem, right? Because our societies, in a sense, survive through the constant, okay, production of objects of social use.
Yeah. So, like as a system, people need to be trading and exchanging. In other words, social interaction.
Yes, and the
Needs to
second
go
that there is,
on.
and the second
Yeah,
that this, the circuit of capital or even the circuit of revenue are disrupted, there
yeah,
are indeed very, very immediate and very quick and very visible
yeah,
problems to the economy that
and
appear.
and the pandemic. Obviously, you need to do a lockdown during a pandemic, which restricts and strangulates the circulation of goods and commodities. Exactly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the general reason. The response from at least the Fed. I can't speak for Spain because I don't know how things went over there, but over here, right now, a third of all dollars in the country are in the stock market right now. That's where all of the inflation has been concentrated because they pumped so many trillions, hyperinflating these stocks up so high, just to keep the Nasdaq from collapsing or the Dow Jones from collapsing, artificially inflating the values of these stocks just so that they could basically hide the recession. So now they've effectively disconnected the stock market, fully disconnected it from the health of the actual economy. I'm just wondering when it's all going to come down because a lot of these stocks are not worth what we see them at right now. They're just that high because of inflation, you know.
Yeah, so there's certainly that problem right now in the United States, in particular. But I also know that there are similar problems in different nations. But the United States is of course very important because the stock market in the United States is, so to say, the one that dictates. Okay, almost.
It's like a religion. It almost feels like people worship it
Well,
sometimes.
it's not even just a religion. It's like an actual material dependence on this particular. It is ideological, of course, but it is material
Yeah,
elements
of
to
course.
that dependence as well. But what I'm saying is that it's actually true, correctly true. And if you hear, and I was listening from some financial experts on this subject, that they were making certain advices on how to invest your money. They were saying, like we were doing this, analytics about the US stock market, and we have found that there is indeed, a lot of problem with this overinflation of the stock market, and that's why they advised, okay, at least they advised me to invest on the US dollar instead of on the stock market,
Yeah,
right? And there's economic reasons for this as well. But okay, but the problem is, okay, so we were talking about the COVID crisis,
yeah,
is that in a sense, and actually, this is a really good question. Maybe I can touch a little bit on it. Is that the inflation, okay, of the financial sector, especially during the first decade of the 2000s, okay, and even starting already in the 1990s, okay, is also due to a lack of profitability elsewhere, okay, a lack of profitability elsewhere that also incentivized a lot of investment on this particular sector, because that sector was in that case being more profitable, and there was also certain elements of deregulation that took place that also incentivized that particular investment, and that also motivated the specific bubbles. But for example, what Anwar Shaikh and what the Marxist really answer to this question is that we shouldn't just look at, in a sense, the trigger. This is the proper word, at the trigger. We should look also at the fundamental problem behind all of that. And what do we look for? We look for profitability, because
right.
profitability is really the driving force of capitalist societies. And we look also to the tendency of the rate of profit.
Yeah.
And this tendency is for it to fall. But again, a tendency doesn't mean that it's always falling. It is rather a tendential fall.
There's counteracting tendencies that
of course.
that can restore the rate of profit.
And this is actually a really simple argument as well. It's a really simple argument that Marx makes, and you can even see this algebraically very simply. If you want, we can do this like in Paint, like really simply. We can do that. But like I was saying, like this is a really simple argument that has found again a lot of empirical corroboration. And so at a very technical level, we can argue about certain parts of the business cycle theory within Marxist and classical this approach to Marxist classical economics. But there is a very clear and a very concise argument for why the profit rate has to have this tendency, and why even if it rises at a given point in time, this doesn't disprove the theory, because again there's a tendential mechanism. So if you want, we can start like with the rate of profit. So how do we define the rate of profit in value terms?
The rate
of profit in value terms is the ratio of surplus value to the sum of constant capital. So you can just write R like lowercase r. Just write like lowercase r.
The rate of profit is
in value terms. In value terms. We can also talk about it in money terms, but it's important to talk about it in value terms. It is equal to the ratio, so the fraction of in the numerator, surplus value, so you can write S over the sum of constant capital and variable capital, so over the total initial investment. So you can write C plus B, V. Now in order to see why this tendency plans out theoretically, we can do something, which is divide both parts of that ratio by variable capital. So you can say write an equal sign,
Yeah.
And now write S over V.
S over V.
Over, or if you want to write like a different division sign, maybe like the like the division sign.
S over V over what?
Over C plus B over V.
Over C
plus V over V as well. Yeah.
All right.
So this is algebraic manipulation. You are just dividing both the numerator and the denominator by V. Now, what does C plus B over V? What is this equivalent to algebraically? This is equivalent to C over V plus 1. So you can write S over V over C plus over V plus 1. And put it...
S over V over C plus 1?
So C over V...
Oh, okay.
No. S over V, and then put a division sign, and then parentheses.
All right.
C over V plus, and then close parenthesis plus 1.
Okay.
Now, so like this is better seen like in like the division like going vertically, but maybe we can see this still. So we have here that the rate of profit can be expressed algebraically as the ratio of the rate of surplus value, which is S over V, over the organic composition of capital, which is C over V. Now hear this, Hear this. Now, there are two different forms of extraction of surplus value. There's absolute and relative surplus value. An absolute surplus value normally relies on extending the length of the working day or intensifying it. Yes. That would be a better way of writing this.
I'm just trying to make it more obvious, but I'm listening. No, go ahead. I'm not stopping.
Okay. So since we have that is one way of extraction of surplus value, absolute surplus value, we also need to understand that there are limits to absolute surplus value extraction, which are physical limits. You can lower the wages of your workers, but never to an extent where they can no longer live. I mean, sometimes yes, sometimes yes, because if you have different workers elsewhere that are going to take the role of those, you can do that. But primarily, okay,
Neoliberalism.
there are limits to how much you can intensify through absolute means, okay, through lengthening the working day and through, for example, lowering wages and through all of that. There are limits to how you can do this and to increase surplus value, so to increase exploitation, and therefore to increase your profit rate and your
Yeah,
profits.
yeah, but
Now,
that
there's
so
a different form, okay, there's a different form, which is relative surplus value, which occurs when you increase the productivity of labor. And how do you do that? By increasing, okay, the technical conditions, by improving the technical conditions,
yeah,
whether through more constant capital, okay, through better
advancing
technology.
advancing
Okay,
means of production, and
and this is and this is theoretically, at least, in principle, this is far more extensible, far more extensive, okay, so far more let's say likely to produce better outcomes than absolute surplus value extraction. So capitalism, okay, in its in being driven by profits, if, okay, there are two forms of extraction of surplus value that can enhance profitability, and one has limits but the other one has less limits, okay, then the second one is obviously going to be more prominent. And this is part of why capitalism is so innovative and why capitalism leads to so much technological innovation, okay. It is because there is this pressure, okay, by competition to increase, okay, the productivity of labor. And how is this done? How can we see this graphically? Okay, you increase constant capital relative to variable capital in order to increase surplus value. Now, what happens, okay, if constant capital increases? Okay, in this diagram, I think you.
You want it back?
Yeah.
I'll bring it back.
You can see because like this is very nice to see why there's this tendency. Okay, so you can see here that in the denominator of this ratio, okay, C over V, okay, is the organic composition of capital that I was talking about before. And if you increase C and you keep V constant, the denominator increases. Now you can do some calculus to see that if you increase the denominator here, the increment of the rate of profit is going to be, it's actually going to decrease. The rate of profit is going to decrease. Okay. You can do calculus to find this, but you can also see this like numerically. You can see that if you increase the denominator, the ratio decreases as well. So it decreases. So if you increase the denominator, the ratio decreases. Okay. So it is 1/2 is larger than 1/3.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what happens that if constant capital is, it has this tendency of increasing relative to variable capital, then there is also a tendency for the rate of profit to fall.
There's so a couple things that I wanted to say. You are correct when you say capitalism drives innovation. I agree with this statement insofar as it involves really just expanding the production process and just tapping into new markets of consumer goods. I don't really think that the system is inherently industrious and innovative, like completely, just because there are a great deal of technologies that would solve a lot of problems that are not being used or implemented today. But with the rate of profit and its tendency to fall, I don't know. I'm sure you're familiar with some estimations. I think Michael Roberts estimates that it's going to hit it's going to be trending towards zero by like the 2050s, 2060s. Some people think that's going to be the death knell for capitalism, but I don't personally think that. What do you know of rentier vampire capitalism?
Okay, so this is really important because I do not accept the premise that capitalism is not an innovative system. Okay, it's the complete opposite. Okay, capitalism is constantly innovating because there is this material pressure for it to be so innovative and for it to increase. Okay, the productive capabilities, so as to enhance, okay, surplus value extraction via relative surplus value. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
this is important because this is Marx, okay? I'm
I'm not saying that I agree with the premise. I agree with the premise that it's innovative in the sense of it's innovative insofar as that innovation can be packaged and sold cheaper than its competitor. Is what
No,
I'm
no,
trying
no.
to
So
say.
listen, yes. So like it's innovative, okay, insofar as that innovation enhances profitability,
Yeah,
okay, but it
yeah,
is not necessarily that doesn't necessarily mean that it is innovative in making human lives better. For example, okay,
exactly.
sometimes yes, but it is not necessarily the case. Okay, it is innovative, okay, as I was saying here, insofar as profit is concerned, and that's why we were talking about the rate of profit.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay?
yeah, yeah.
And it is this innovative pressure of capitalism, these technological development pressures of capitalism that explain the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Now, what
Gotcha.
it means for the rate of profit to fall is that if the profit rate is falling, okay, this implies that there is failures of individual capitals, and that these failures, pile up, okay, and then you get to a point where you suddenly have a great economic downturn, okay. But it is the rate of profit, okay, that forces, that in a sense is the underlying, let's say, pressure that is in the end the one that ultimately explains all of this phenomena. Okay, even though there are certain triggers, this is the underlying factor that is there guiding these outcomes. Now, this is the important insight, okay, of the classical and of the Marxist school, that profitability is the one that drives, okay, the outcomes of capitalism, and this is also why capitalism is such an innovative system. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that it is a good system, but it means that it is certainly innovative, and that's why there are all of these pressures to innovate in terms of technology, in terms of ways of extracting relative surplus value. And this is at the same time what explains the tendencies of capitalist economies to have these downturns,
Right.
okay, and these booms and busts.
Hey,
So
hey,
yeah.
man. We're already running above and beyond the time that I initially had scheduled. And there's another part of the stream that I was going to do. This is a very fascinating conversation. So, I mean, maybe we should have you on again sometime because I'd love to get more into the rate of profit and talk about the implications of it and just. But I feel like that's another stream, to be honest. I got at 4:30. I was planning on doing the second part of the stream. I was just wondering if you'd like to do a quick, like 10 to 15 minute Q&A. See if people have any questions for you. Before
Sure.
we
Yeah.
wrap
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
up. Yeah. No, I enjoy this, man. Like you're an encyclopedia of knowledge. Like I learn something new every time I talk to you. But so why don't we go through some of these questions, guys? Do you have questions? Yeah, and you see it, right? The questions people are posting in the corner of the StreamYard screen. You should be able to see it.
Let me see.
Yeah.
Comments. Yes. I see some comments here.
Yeah.
But are
Someone
they all
said,
questions or?
yeah, some of them are. Someone said that Zegzizi would destroy you. I seriously doubt it. Zegzizi is a bad faith actor. But anyways,
Does he have any contentions? Like, does
he's
he have
he's
any opposing views to me?
he's just a left com. I mean, in all honesty, I don't know. It would depend on the topic, but yeah, he's basically a left com. But
Yeah,
anyways,
but like, does he have any views that are different to the ones that I expressed here today?
I have no idea. You would have to talk to him. But anyways, my question is, how do you respond to a feminist who says Marxism doesn't care about unproductive labor and that it's insulting to call domestic labor unproductive? I guess.
No, but domestic labor is productive, in fact.
Yeah, it absolutely is
But it
productive.
is just like not market activities, you know. So they are not market activities, but they are nevertheless production activities. You know, the ones, for example, a traditional wife cooking a meal for the entire family. That is a production activity, indeed.
Yeah, reproducing human beings is absolutely productive. So I don't know what they're talking about. Yeah, we already got to that one. I don't know if you have anything else to say.
But like feminism, Marxism does indeed care about unproductive labor. It is part of our analytical framework as well, and we can use unproductive labor to explain certain things that are actually really important. Okay, the size of unproductive sectors relative to those of production sectors can explain a lot of things about economic downturns.
Right. Hold on. Just letting my friend know I'm pushing the stream back a bit because here I'm going to need to take a break before I do the next one. But my question to Victor is, what is your ideal road to socialism?
I mean, there's no ideal. Okay, so like the ideal road to socialism is that tomorrow, there's a coalition of all of the governments in the world, and they all say we are going to establish a socialist society. Okay, that would be the ideal.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen.
But that's not going to happen, of course.
Oh yeah, no. It's going to require a little ecological catastrophe here, some mass migrations and climate droughts there, some revolutions here. There's going to be a massive uprooting, a social upheaval on a global scale, and it's going to have to be a concentrated, conscious, globalized effort on part of workers everywhere. Do the scarcity of certain raw materials play into the labor theory of value?
Yeah, of course it does. Of course they do. I mean, scarcity is important because if you have, for example, a very limited amount of certain resources and those are used in order to produce some commodity, and the fact that there is very low availability of those resources means that the reproducibility of that particular object is really low. Okay, so it is virtually an unreproducible object. Then this means that the law of value is not going to tend to apply to those kinds of objects. So certainly scarcity of raw materials is important.
Right. Another question is, if the LTV would be used in a planned economy, what would even be a commodity in a planned economy?
Yeah, so this is something that I say all the time. So the labor theory of value applies to competitive market economies, okay, within the framework of a capitalist mode of production. So in a planned economy, the labor theory of value doesn't apply. Now that doesn't mean, okay, and I was arguing with somebody the other day on Discord who was asking me about this. Okay, that doesn't mean that we cannot use some of the mathematical formalisms and of the formal tools and methods that are used in order to formalize and to empirically test the labor theory of value in order to have certain applications to economic planning. But the labor theory of value as a theory doesn't apply to a planned economy at all. Prices are not set competitively; they are set by a central planner.
Right. Anyways, let's see. Someone is asking you to define productive and unproductive labor.
Yeah, sure. So production labor is that which is engaged in the production or transformation of objects of social use. Okay, and unproductive labor is that which can be either distribution labor, which is not the same as transportation, although there are certain kinds of transportation that are distributive, but distribution labor, okay. And we also have personal consumption, which is not even a form of labor. And we also have, for example, labor for maintenance of a given set of social conditions, like, for example, policemen. Okay, policemen don't engage in production labor, okay, but they nevertheless have, they do a form of labor, and it is also a wage labor. But, for example, since they're not producing objects of social use, which is, what defines production labor, we cannot consider them production labor. Distribution labor is also not productive, okay, but production labor is that which transforms or creates new objects of social use.
Right. Let's see. Money, morality of markets, planning means centralization bad because individuals cannot do. This is just a comment. It's not really a question. Morality of markets because planning means centralization bad because individuals cannot do whatever they want and smoke weed all day, scoring welfare. No shame to the stoners out there, but I get the sentiment. Value and price are not the same thing. Am I getting this right?
Yes, yes, that person is certainly getting it right.
Yeah,
Value and price are always and everywhere different, but value is what tries to explain relative prices.
yeah. Value is like Higgs boson. It's an assumed constant. It doesn't actually it's not a physical thing that exists. But
Well, I mean, so it is certainly a social property of commodities
yeah,
value,
yeah. It's assumed
but
to
it
be
is not
true.
a physical property.
Yeah,
It is rather a social property.
yeah, exactly. What do you think about getting rid of money as soon as possible using repurposed algorithms from the private sector?
Well, I mean, that depends on which algorithms, on what we are really trying to accomplish there. I mean, I'm generally inclined to believing that money is still, a fairly important aspect of our societies, and certainly one that needs to exist for at least the initial stages of a transition toward a socialist society. But it is nevertheless important to keep in mind that money is also one of the things that we want to abolish at some point.
Yeah. Let's see. Would we need conscription in modern day lower communism?
What is conscription?
Uh, Conscription is when people are yeah, compulsively. You're made by the state to join the military or basically get recruited to do labor or be like a national guardsman. That's what conscription is. It's when you're made by the state to be a servant of the state, basically, or in the military or whatever.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. I mean, yeah, I mean, of course. So the state is always exerting some kind of coercive influence on our wills, and it certainly would need to do so within the context of a lower stage communism. That's for sure.
Yeah,
But of course, we want to minimize the amount of let's say, coercion that the state uh, inflicts upon people.
yeah. Next up, Victor, in a planned economy, would people still be able to get drugs and alcohol? I got an answer for this one as well, but you first.
I mean, I'm generally a libertarian in this manner. I do believe that people should be able to consume drugs and alcohol if they wish so, But I also believe that we should engage in proper education and in proper incentivizing of having a healthy lifestyle,
Yeah,
where drugs and alcohol don't take over, our life.
yeah,
But I do genuinely believe that proper human experience, requires at some instances the use of certain things. Not that it
yeah,
is, absolutely necessary, but I'm generally not opposed, and I know that for a
yeah,
lot of people, these are really, these are substances that enhance maybe even their performance in tests.
yeah. If
Not just for like hedonistic reasons, but like even
yeah,
for academic and for
they,
other reasons.
yeah, drugs have a lot of utility. It's not just people, trying to get high or whatever. If your society has a bunch of people that feel compelled to get high all the time, typically it's a product of alienation. I mean, I'm willing to bet that if we were to have a much more socialized environment where people, actually enjoyed their lives and engaging in daily activities, they'd probably feel less compelled because getting high is sort of like playing video games. It's a form of escapism. So, I mean, the reason why I'm against prohibition is in general because it doesn't work. People are still going to do it, and all you're doing is criminalizing what is otherwise a social ill. Personally, I think in socialism, drugs should be distributed and manufactured by the state. That way, they can be made cheaper and better. Like I said earlier, drugs they're a means to an end. They aren't just a means to get high. Like if let's say you're in a car accident and you get hit really bad, and now you have a shattered rib cage, right? Are you going to lie there in the hospital bed wreathing in pain all day? Or are you going to pop a Xanax? You're going to take that Xanax to help deal with the pain, Or are you just going to sit there with a broken rib cage, like in pain all day? You know what I mean? So, anyways, what is the name of the cute doggy on the bed? That would be Onyx. He is my little buddy. Onyx, hey, come here. Say hi to the camera. say hi to Onyx. He's my little buddy. I took him to the dog park earlier. He got into it with a little dog, with another dog, and his old collar got bit off, so I had to buy him a new collar. He's got a little spiked collar now. Someone's shooting off fireworks. That's because it's almost July 4th. Oh, shoot. But yeah, here in a minute, we'll give it a couple more minutes, but I'm about to take him on a walk. Who's Michael Hendrick?
I actually don't with that surname. Let me see.
Let's see. I'm gonna scroll up.
Okay. Yeah. So I know this person. So he's a political scientist of Germany, but I don't really know that well his work or anything of the sort. But hopefully, like probably this person is referring to this person. He's like a public intellectual. He has like lectures on. I believe in YouTube he has some lectures as well. Yes,
Right.
yes, he does. Yeah, and he actually has talked a little bit about the labor theory of value and so on and so forth. So yes, like I'm not very familiar, but I know his face.
Right. Let's see. Is there anything else? I'm just looking up in case there's anything I might have missed. How is it? Wait, where is the exploitation in that example? Especially if we both own a landscaping business, how is it? How has it been taken? You are part owner of that business, therefore it profits you too. For example, why would you need the LTV in a workers' cooperative?
I mean, what is that question really?
Oh, here we go. I missed some of it. My question to Victor: why do we need the LTV? What problems of capitalism that require it? There's none. They can be solved without LTV. And then he says, okay, if I get us a job mowing my neighbor's lawn, we decide to split it, the payment 60-40 or 50-50. Why do I need the LTV? Where's the exploitation in that example? I have an answer for it. I would say if you're in a cooperative, in order to have like capital reserves, you would in a sense have to exploit yourself. So it is possible to exploit yourself in the Marxian definition of the term, but what do you have to say?
So I mean, my take here is that the exploitation is not occurring in exchange. Okay, so you when you pay for somebody to do a job for you, okay, that is not necessarily an exploitative relationship. Exploitation occurs in the production process. Okay, so imagine, okay, that you have a cooperative, and even in cooperative, even in a system of cooperatives, okay, there's still going to have to be exploitation because surplus value has to exist in order for an economy, a market economy, even with dominated by cooperatives, still needs to exist in order for that society to exist. Okay, because if there is no surplus value production in that kind of society, there's no investment back into the production process. There's no innovation. There's just like an stagnation, a survival in a sense, and even in that sense, it's not stationary. Okay, a form of production. Okay, so exploitation is again a phenomenon of production, not of exchange. Okay, when the capitalist pays the workers, within the context of volume 1 of Das Kapital, he is paying exactly what the labor power is worth. Exactly what it is worth. However, the labor power works beyond, okay, what is needed for its own reproduction. It works beyond what it is worth. And that is why there is surplus value in capitalist societies. It is not because the capitalist pays less to the worker than the worth of their labor power. It is rather because the labor power can be extended to work beyond what is needed for its own reproduction.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you have a simple example of I pay, like a 16-year-old kid in order for them to cut my grass, okay, there's no exploitation here, okay? There's no exploitation here. That person is just cutting your grass for an agreed price. Exploitation occurs in the production process. Okay.
All right. So let's do two more. So someone's asking you if you've read Economic Problems in the USSR, or yeah, it's called. Have you read?
Who wrote this? Because there are different books with a similar name, and
yeah,
I have certainly read.
Problems of Socialism. I think he's talking about the pamphlet or the documents that Stalin wrote back in, I think, the late 1930s.
Oh yes. He's talking about. Okay.
Yeah, Stalin's document.
Yeah, so I remember reading this like 2 or 3 years ago, and I know that there are certain insights there which are decent, okay, but in general, I don't really have like a systematized opinion on this piece of writing. So if you're asking me for a systematic review of the paper of the book, sorry, uh, I don't think I can give you that.
All right. So next, someone's asking, why do people always use isolated examples of two individuals to debunk the LTV? It's like the two guys stranded on an island example that libertarians love to use.
Yes, I mean, so that's because they use methodological individualism in an attempt to, in a sense, obfuscate the social nature of value formation. Okay, and this is something that I didn't get to do this, but this is a really nice way of looking at why utility theories of value that are based on utility are incorrect. Okay, which is even an example that no utility theorists can explain, but that Marx already laid out in Das Kapital, and he already showed through this example basically why these theories cannot really work. Okay, which is, imagine two people exchange. Okay, even in the case of two individuals, they exchange. So producer, let's say producer of commodity X, okay, exchanges, okay, 1 unit of their commodity for 1 unit of the commodity of producer of commodity Y. Okay, and both commodities are worth $5. Okay, so in that exchange, both have gained in utility. Okay, because both have gained something from the exchange that is more useful to them than what they already had. And this is Marx, okay, saying this. Nevertheless, they haven't gained anything insofar as exchange value is concerned, because they still have a commodity both worth $5 in the market. Now, how can a utility theorist explain this? They can't. They can't, because there has been an increment in aggregate utility. Okay, however you want to measure it, there has been an increment there, but there hasn't been an increment through that exchange in aggregate exchange value. Okay, both commodities are still worth $5. Why? Because there is because prices are social, and because the law explaining them is also a social law. Okay, and in the same way that they both have a commodity, okay, that has the same value in the sense of socially necessary direct and direct labor time, they also have a commodity that is exactly the same insofar as exchange value is concerned, but not insofar as use value is concerned, because both have gained something that has more utility to them than before.
Right.
Okay, so this tells us that utility, okay, and price are categories of different order. Okay, and utility and value, which is the underlying substance that explains these prices, relative prices in particular, is also a social property. Okay, and they are different categories, so they are categories, sorry, of different order. That's why one cannot explain the other. That is not the same case, for example, with labor times.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and answer this one, and then we're going to kill it. But why do dumb people say I should stop using my phone when I say I'm communist? I don't get it. I mean, you can answer it too if you like. My answer to this is because it's hard to describe, but people think that because you participate in society, because you're an individual, and that you are who you are because you're part of society and you have a society that, that you exist in, you're not allowed to criticize that society or take pause with any of the issues that go on in that society, I suppose. It's derived from the mindset of, well, you've got it good enough, stop complaining, I guess. Like, it doesn't get better than this, kind of. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that this is just a very gross misrepresentation of what being a communist is. Communists are not against highly, technologically, advanced phones. They are rather against the mode of production that brings about, a set of outcomes that they deem could be improved upon. Okay, so we are not against the objects of social use, but against the relationships of production that basically characterize the production process by which these commodities are produced. But I'm not against, for example, iPhones. I'm not against cars I mean, I'm against cars in some respects, right? Because of the pollution element and so on and so forth. But I don't have any fundamental moral problem, for example, with somebody who has an iPhone. Okay. Now, I have a problem with the way, okay, with the relationships of production by which that iPhone was produced. But the object itself doesn't have any moral, let's say, either praise or condemnation for me.
Yeah. The problem
So you
isn't.
should
Yeah.
you should if you want to have an iPhone, you can perfectly well buy it, and I would certainly not be against that.
Yeah, the problem isn't the iPhone. The problem is that iPhone under the context of capitalism. I mean, one last thing I'll say, I'll do my little plug against planned obsolescence, but phones are deliberately produced to break like every 2 to 3 years. So people are like compelled to buy the next model that's like tweaked here and there. Like there's a reason why they keep turning out generations of smartphones, and it's ecocide when you consider the amount of pollution and carbon footprint that goes into harvesting the rare earth minerals that go into the production of a smartphone. When we could design smartphones that are easily repairable, that last as long as possible, with maximum lifespan, but we don't do that because there's more money in creating shitty little smartphones that people have to buy every other year. So, I mean, that's all I have to
No,
say.
no, absolutely, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why we say that, for example, profitability and human welfare sometimes they go hand in hand, but not always. Not
Yeah.
always.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, human
Because they are
well-being.
they are fundamentally categories of also of different order. Okay.
Yeah.
So human well-being and profits are categories of different order. So sometimes they might go pari passu. Sometimes they might indeed go hand in hand, but it is not necessarily the case that they will go hand in hand. In fact, sometimes what is more profitable is what is less good for human well-being, or what is actually more harmful to human well-being. That is a
Yeah.
key insight of any communist advocacy.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you there. Honestly, human need is really just a side effect of profitability. It's not the goal, of capitalism. Human well-being is a side effect. It's not the goal. But anyways,
Is sometimes is something that is produced again as a side effect sometimes, but it's not necessarily the outcome of or the driving force of capitalist societies. The driving force is profitability.
All right. Well, Victor, it's been very good to speak to you again. I'm happy that you came on, talked about a lot of interesting stuff, and we can talk about profit rates and a whole slew of other economic topics next time. I mean, really, you can come back whenever. You might even be able to come back next week, but I was looking to see if I could have Finnish Bolshevik on next week. So, I mean, we'll see. Just whenever you feel like it, whenever you're available, I'd love to have you back. But it's been good. It's been real.
Yeah, no problem. I really enjoyed also the talk, and I think we are in an environment where we have an open mind, and we can actually discuss these things, not in the way that I did with Ubersai, for example, where he was clearly not willing to engage with this honestly.
Oh yeah. I mean, you're gonna encounter a lot of people like that. But what I will say,
I have encountered them. Really.
Right wingers, I see them in a very similar light that I see like religious fundamentalists. They're arguing from a place of pure emotion. And there are intelligent right wingers. There are very intelligent right wingers. But in my experience, intelligent people who are right wingers, if you talk to them long enough and explain your ideas to them long enough, well, let's just say after a certain point, they will cease to be right wingers if they, really are.
That's for sure. That's for sure. But they're also really smart and really intelligent. Catholics, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's been real. I'm going to go ahead and kill the stream. I'll see you guys in about 30 minutes. I'm going to go walk my dog and get something to eat.